This meeting of the Starkville Board of Aldermen will now come to order. Please rise for the saying of the Pledge of Allegiance, to be followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, you have before you a copy of the modified written agenda. Are there any proposed revisions to the agenda as written? Are there any proposed revisions to the agenda as written?
Okay. Those sets of the minutes.
To consent?
To consent, please.
Proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place items 4A and B on the consent agenda. Those items are as follows. The approval of the minutes from the April 2nd, 2013 regular meeting of the Mayor and Board of Aldermen of the City of Starkville. The approval of the minutes of the April 16th, 2013 recess meeting of the Mayor and Board of Aldermen for the City of Starkville. And do you approve of them in their form?
That's their current form.
All right, Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, those matters have been placed on the consent agenda.
All items under personnel on consent, please.
Proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place all items under Roman numeral 11H on the consent agenda. Those items are as follows. The authorization to hire Nicholas Shoemaker and Charles Taylor to fill the vacant positions of firefighter as presented. The authorization to hire Marcus Gillespie to fill the vacant position of service technician in the electric department as presented. The authorization to promote and hire Tony Sykes to fill the vacant position of foreman in the street department as presented. The authorization to advertise to fill the vacant position of lead foreman in the water sewer division of public services as presented. The approval of a job description and authorization to advertise to fill the position of city planner in the community development department as presented. Alderman Dumas, are those your proposed revisions?
It is.
Do I hear any objection?
Number 5.
All right. Item number 5, is that number 5 only, Alderman Bowen?
Just number 5 only.
All right. So item number 5 would not go to consent. As Alderman Dumas's proposed revision stands, the rest of those items would go to consent without objection. Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, items 11H 1 through 4 have been placed on the consent agenda.
Item J, under board business to consent.
All right, the proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place item 10J on the consent agenda. That is the approval of a study by the Community Development Director on identifying and adopting scenic byway and entry corridors to the City of Starkville as presented. Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any?
Is this in our e-packet?
It is not. That was a modification to the agenda.
I'm gonna just ask for that to be removed.
All right, so that will remain on the open agenda. Alderman Dumas, do you have further proposed revisions?
I do not.
All right, are there any further proposed revisions from the members of the board?
Mr. Mayor, may I be recognized?
You may.
Mr. Mayor, these are reduced to writing. The first matter is under board business, Roman number 10, item B, and I just asked Ms. Brewer to clarify that. I'm going to read it. Move approval of accepting the lowest and best bid from Graham Roofing for the replacement of the roof at the Octavia Hall County Library in the amount of $23,889 and paying a 50% share of the replacement cost in the amount of $11,944.50. I'm asking that on the consent agenda, and I'm going to pass it down to Ms. Brewer.
All right, the proposed revision from Alderman Perkins has just been read, and it has been reduced to writing, so without objection, I'm not going to reread it. Any objection? Any objection? All right, seeing none, is there any objection now to placing that matter on the consent agenda for item 10B? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Perkins, do you have further proposed revisions?
Yes, I have 2 remaining items, Mr. Mayor. The next item is consideration of the job description for the city prosecutor and authorization to advertise for letters of interest. And we certainly want to thank our esteemed City Prosecutor, the Honorable Roy Carpenter Jr., for his distinguished service to the city of Starkville since on about October 1 of 1985. So we want to commend him for a job well done. According to the documentation that I received, it is my understanding that his last day with the city will be the 30th day of June of 2013. So it is very imperative, in my opinion as an attorney, that we get someone to replace him as expeditiously as possible so that that person can be with Mr. Carpenter prior to his departure. With that being said, Mr. Mayor, I move approval of the job description for the city prosecutor as presented to us in our packet, and authorization to advertise for letters of interest, and the deadline for the letters of interest will be 5 p.m. on May 30, 2013, and that all letters of interest shall be submitted to our Chief Administrative Officer, Ms. Lynn Spruill, and that Ms. Lynn Spruill be tasked with the immediate responsibility to notify the members of the Octavia County Bar Association about this vacant position, and that this matter will be maybe, and this is not the motion here, but that's the motion, but I'm also suggesting that we can, Mr. Mayor, hopefully the board will consider maybe having a special call meeting so we can try to interview that between the 30th and the 4th, because I think it's imperative that we can try to hire somebody on the 4th of June so this person can be on to meet with Mr. Carpenter. So, but my motion is just as I just announced, Mr. Mayor.
All right, so the proposed revision from Alderman Perkins is to place the job description for city prosecutor and authorization to advertise for letters of interest as presented on the consent agenda with the following additions, that the deadline shall be 5 p.m. on May 30th, 2013, and that Chief Administrative Officer Lynn Spruill will be tasked with notifying the Octavia County Bar of the vacancy. Alderman Perkins, is that your proposed revision?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. Just one note, which is in job description, and the salary range is part of the job description. You said it correctly. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Is there any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda. Do we have, Alderman Perkins, do you have further proposed?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. With regard to the downtown parking, I saw the documentation from the person in charge. I think Ms. Gregory had some correspondence indicating how advantageous this has been to the city and how the revenue has increased for the downtown in light of the officers that is now on duty. In light of those representations, I move approval, and again, this motion reduces to writing. I move approval of creating a permanent full-time parking enforcement officer position with full benefits at a grade 7, $12 per hour, to be added to the police department budget from the ending fund balance, and with a requirement that any change, deletion, or modification of this position is only with board authorization. And Ms. Spruill, it's been reduced to writing.
All right, Alderman Perkins has just read the motion that he's reduced to writing, that he would like to be placed on the consent agenda as item 10H. And as he has just read it and it's been reduced to writing, I will not reread it unless there's any objection. Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none. Is there any objection to that matter being placed on the consent agenda? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Perkins, do you have further proposed?
Yeah, one just came to mind. I said that was my last. Mr. Mayor, this may be a consent agenda item. I couldn't really determine what the amendments were just from looking at it, because there was no a correlation of the current law versus the amended law. The consideration of a resolution authorizing the execution of an amended and restated development and reimbursement agreement by and between the City of Starkville, Mississippi, and Cotton Mill Development Group, Mississippi Limited Liability Company, for related purposes. Maybe perhaps Mr. Attorney or Ms. Spruill can just succinctly tell us what the difference is. That may make the consent agenda.
All this is a mirror image of what the board did for the Castleberry portion of the TIF district some meetings ago. The district is now divided between the Castleberry development section and the Nicholas development section, and this just makes those two sections uniform from a financing statement or financing standpoint under the TIF, and drops the TIF percentage on the Nicholas portion from 95 to 75% to mirror what was done for Castleberry.
So basically, just a housekeeping amendment.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I move that this be placed on the consent agenda.
Proposed revision from Alderman Perkins is to place the approval of a resolution authorizing the execution of an amended and restated development and reimbursement agreement by and between the City of Starkville, Mississippi, and Cotton Mill Development Group, LLC, a Mississippi limited liability company, and for related purposes as presented on the consent agenda. Alderman Perkins, that's your proposed revision.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, let me say, and Ms. Pruitt, I'm sorry I've forgotten this, but Mr. Jason wants to, he's here, Mr. Jason Wooten.
Yes, yes,
Okay, he needs to leave, head back to Jackson early?
yes, sir.
Okay, he wants to come to the top of the agenda. That was the request.
Yes, sir.
And the city attorney, I think, wants to speak very briefly, not to exceed 5 minutes before that. So, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Attorney and Mr. Wooten wants to come to the top of the agenda, but he needs to get to Jackson.
All right, let me
Go ahead.
finish hearing whether there's objection on the previous matter.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Is there any objection to placing the matter previously stated regarding Cotton Mill Development Group on the consent agenda? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? All right, seeing none. Alderman Perkins, is your proposed revision to move items 10C and 10D to the front of the agenda to now be Roman numeral 4, right under the consent agenda?
Yes, sir.
And to reorder the agenda?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Proposed revision from Alderman Perkins is to reorder the agenda, placing items C and D under board business now as a standalone Roman numeral number 4, and reordering the agenda to accommodate the change. Is there any objection to that proposed revision? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, the agenda has been so reordered. Alderman Perkins, do you have further proposed revisions?
No, sir, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Are there further proposed revisions from the members of the board? Any further proposed revisions from the members of the board? Any further proposed revisions? All right, seeing none, a motion to approve the agenda as revised is in order.
So moved.
Motion has been made by Alderman Corey to approve the agenda as revised. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Carver. Alderman Corey, do you wish to speak on the merits? Any
No.
discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. You now have before you the approval of the consent agenda as revised. Do I hear any objection to the approval of the consent agenda as revised? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, the consent agenda as revised has been approved. And the agenda has been reordered. So the next matter you have before you is a report from Jason Wooten of Pepper Wooten on the FEMA requirements for Carver Drive ditch. Mr. Wooten?
And Mayor, as Alderman Perkins said, I'm going to set the table for Mr. Wooten and just kind of bat lead off and let him play cleanup. I was charged by the board to monitor the progress of Starkville attempting to get clearance from FEMA to perform the work on the Carver Drive ditch. I've investigated the matter, and here's a report on where we've been and where we are now based on my best understanding. Over the past 4 years, the board has taken numerous steps to try to address the flooding related to Carver Drive. In the spring of 2010, the board voted to pipe and cover a section of the ditch. In January of 2011, Mississippi Emergency Management Authority, MEMA, visited Carver Drive ditch and informed the city that it needed to file a letter of map revision, what is called a LOMAR, with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. Starkville, then I understand, contracted with Jason Wooten to facilitate that and to provide that LOMAR to FEMA. In the summer of 2012, the board voted to naturally restore the remainder of the Carver Drive ditch, the portion that was not piped and covered. Mr. Wooten submitted on behalf of Starkville a revised LOMAR for that work and got that on file on or about August 21st of 2012. From August 2012 to January 2013, FEMA requested 2 rounds of supplemental information from the city, and Mr. Wooten provided such supplemental information to FEMA. On February 19 of 2013, the board voted to concrete the base and the sides of Carver Drive ditch to further try to provide relief to the residents. On March 9th, Mr. Wooten filed a revised LOMAR for that work with FEMA, and we all understood that that put FEMA on a 90-day clock to approve or deny the proposed LOMAR provided by Starkville. On March 28th of 2013, FEMA served Starkville with yet another request for additional information, and Mr. Wooten sent in that additional information. On April 24th, FEMA wrote Mr. Wooten again to say that Starkville supplementation was incomplete and that the complete information had to be received by FEMA on June 26th, or that FEMA would terminate Starkville's request. And so procedurally, that's my understanding of the facts as to where we stand.
Mr. Wooten?
Mr. Lammer's done a great job actually concisely wrapping it up. That's pretty much where we are. The third submittal, there was some discrepancy in how they worded some of the information, so that's the reason we had a quick turnaround from FEMA. And we're in the process of answering those questions now. So we're gonna have that submitted we're gonna definitely meet the deadline. Hopefully by the end of next week, we'll have the 3A submittal through FEMA. And that's gonna be very close to wrapping it up. We're getting near the goal line, so to speak, at this point.
Are there any questions or comments from the members of the board? Alderman Perkins.
Mr. Wooten, let me just say, first of all, thank you for all that you're doing for the city of Starkville, including your work on behalf of the Carver Drive ditch. And you probably know by now that it's an award, and I'm about ready to put this matter to bed as soon as we can. And I know you are too. Just some friendly questions, nothing very difficult for you. I'm familiar with the last memo from Anthony Donald. It looks like every time you submit something, he wants you to almost want you to come to Washington and plead your case for one of the congressional committees or something. That was much he's asking you for. He asked you to submit some additional information. He told you if you don't get it submitted by June the 26th, and Starkville, it'll be treated, if this is a new submittal, we'll get to the back of the line. So my question to you is, are we on schedule, and we're gonna get everything that Mr. Donald and those federal bureaucrats want on this country ditch down here?
Yes, sir. And that's the submittal we're gonna try to make by the end of next week. If not, it'll be the following week. We meet their deadline, and Mr. Donald's statement is standard for them.
Yes, sir.
They leave a window open for you to reply, and if not, they drop it simply because of their caseload. They would probably work with us a little on that. I hate to go on record for that, but they probably would. But we're gonna meet that deadline, no issue.
So, with all the things that Mr. Donald set forth, he had a number of things, all the emails, and I've read every last one of them, so we'll have everything that he's asking for.
We have done our best to answer everything he's asked for up to now, and this 3A submittal is what we're calling it. We're going to answer those to the best of our ability, and I'm sure they will have one or two more comments to make. I don't want everybody leaving tonight thinking this last submittal is dead set to be the end of the project. They will probably have a couple of comments.
Right, one thing I just want to just say very, very respectfully, if you don't mind, if you would just give him a call once it's done, because it just seems like when you submit something, we get another email, and so we can at least hopefully get something started this summer, because I really hate to see this project go past this term.
Sure.
If you just talk to Mr. Donald to see, make sure, because when June 26th comes, we don't want him to send us an email or correspondence or documentation, say, well, the city of Starkville didn't do what it asked, and with the back of the line. So if you would just give us that assurance, and of course, you and the city attorney has been working very well together. We appreciate your teamwork and your continuous teamwork. So thank you for ensuring to us in advance that everything will be submitted, and I won't be calling. I'm going to take you that everything will get done. So
Sure.
hopefully we can get some while.
We will.
The only time we get some work done out there is this time of the year. We missed this summer, and it puts us the next summer.
Hopefully we can get something started, but we may need to put it off. I understand, we kind of missed our window.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll be happy to make that call. I generally see a confirmation email that they've received the data. It's submitted electronically. I don't know if that's the actual personal response or an automatic response, but I usually get a response from them confirming receipt.
Yes, sir.
A day or so after that, after he's had time to digest it, I'll give him a call.
And one last thing, if you would be so continuous, nice, and kind as your professionalism in your work, just CC or email the city attorney since the board charged him to keep the board informed of what's going on.
I've been trying to keep Mr. Latimer.
And you have,
on touch.
and we just making sure, yeah, you've been doing a great job in doing that.
And, you know, you may need, I may forget to CC him on some, but I will do my best.
You've
on
been
that.
doing a great job with doing that, but we appreciate it, we know you're gonna make it happen, we have all the confidence in you, thanks for all your work.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else have any questions?
Any further questions from the board for Mr. Wooten? Any further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Wooten.
All right, thank you.
And Alderman Perkins, Mr. Latterman tells me he has covered what he intended to cover in his report. Do you need any further report from him?
I'm satisfied, he has covered everything needs to be covered, I'm up to speed on it, he has done everything needs to be said.
All right, that will take us into announcements and comments by the mayor and members of the board. And I have one announcement tonight, and that is the introduction of our newest employee, LaToya Williams. It is my pleasure to welcome LaToya Williams as our new radio operator records clerk for the Starkville Police Department. LaToya is originally from Columbus, Mississippi, and is a graduate of Columbus High School. She attended Mississippi State University, where she studied criminology. Before joining the Starkville Police Department, LaToya worked as an office assistant for curriculum instruction and special education at Mississippi State University. LaToya is the daughter of Margie and Bobby Williams of Columbus, and she has two sisters, Shawnquata and Tori Williams. She and her family attend United Christian Baptist Church in Columbus. LaToya has many interests, including criminology, victimology, as well as victim advocacy. In her spare time, she enjoys singing, dancing, and listening to music. Please join me in welcoming LaToya.
I told her a speech was required. I believe she's prepared.
All right, that concludes my comments for this evening. Do we have any comments from the members of the board? Do we have any comments from the members of the board? Seeing none, we'll move to citizen comments. At this time, any citizen wishing to make comments may do so by coming forward, introducing yourself. I got two of you coming, and you'll be recognized to speak for a maximum of 3 minutes. First one of you that gets up there gets it.
I'll yield to you.
All right, and just as a reminder at the outset, because we have a large crowd, I think is mainly here to speak on historic preservation tonight. We will have 3 public hearings that are set aside specifically to talk on historic preservation. So if you're here to speak on those issues, please wait until those public hearings. And at this time, we'll hear general comments from the public. Mr. Burnham.
I'm Alan Burnham from Ward 2. I have 2 house cleaning items I'd like to bring before you. One of them has to do with the meeting of 2 weeks ago with the abbreviated agenda for the May 7th meeting on Election Day, in which no consideration was given to the fact that there were 2 citizens there to make comments. And that was just bypassed with the motion to go ahead and recess the meeting before we ever got to that, yet it was on the agenda. I felt that slighted me and the other gentleman that was there. We have few enough opportunities to address an issue before the entire board, and that deprived us of one. So that is one of my complaints. The second item that I have to deal with has to do with the minutes of the April 26th meeting that were put on the consent agenda this evening, that they are incomplete. And the fact that under the item of citizen comments, it states there that Dorothy Isaac, Ward 6, Danny Carlisle, and Barry Sullivan, Ward 1, offered comments in support of the Parks Commission. If you remember, I made comments recommending that you as a board act for the removal of members of the Parks Commission. That was not in the minutes. I was accused by Dorothy Isaac of being politically motivated in making the comments that I made. I feel that the city may be politically motivated in not including my comments because it now reads as though they just spontaneously came out in support of the Park Commission. And so I want the fact that I addressed them under the comments and the nature of my comments that I was not in support of the Park Commission to appear in the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burnham. And Mr. Turner.
Greetings to the mayor and board. My name is Alvin Turner, Ward 7. Want to recognize the absence of Vice Mayor Sis Trump and Alderman Vaughn.
Thank you, Alvin.
To the electric department, thank you for helping us get through the 5 hours on the outage. And please do the same thing for the 23rd of next month. All right. It kept us alert, and all right, we thank you for that. The citizens of Starkville outcry to the government body of the city of Starkville. Boardtown Village was upset because of the redistricting. They didn't know what to do. They felt like that they were left out, and that was all of Boardtown Village. We also had a lot of people that did not vote because of problem with the map, problem with the name not on the book, or like for you to get that straight before June 4th. A lot of people was angry and didn't vote because couldn't find the name on the book. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Thank you, Mr. Turner. You may.
Mr. Turner, before you leave, just one point of information. It's been a number of years ago since Boardtown was a polling place for a municipal election. Boardtown, years ago, used to be the polling place for both Ward 6 and 7. So Boardtown at this time is only used for North Starkville 2. So it's not used as a municipal polling place, and the city of Starkville did not change its polling places during the last redistricting. I just wanted to give you that information.
Well, they would like to understand what happened.
Yes, sir.
They wanted to vote, but then after they didn't see nothing.
Yes, sir.
They didn't vote.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Further citizen comments? Do we have any further citizen comments? Yes, sir.
My name is William Parker. I own Power Stroke Equipment here in Starkville. And I have spoken with Miss Lynn before earlier, probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I was wanting to talk to the entire board. I would like to know, as a citizen paying taxes here, why we are spending tax dollars outside of our county, in particular with the Park and Rec as far as they're concerned. They purchased 2 Exmark mowers from Biddy Saw Works in Columbus, and I've been to a board meeting over there at the Park and Rec and wasn't satisfied with the answer. Nobody can give me a reason why they purchased that. We actually set that deal up for them, and the only answer I got out of the Park and Rec is we can do whatever we want to do, and that's not acceptable to me. I'd like to know why, exactly why they chose to go out of the county, and I provided some information on there. I do believe there's misappropriations of funds over there, and would be willing to testify if needed to that. I can prove some of the things on there, and I've turned some information in to y'all, and would like to know what the status of that is, and would like to get an answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Further citizen comments? Do we have any further citizen comments? Any further citizen comments? All right, seeing none, we'll now move to public appearances, and we have one public appearance scheduled tonight, and that is by Mr. George McKee. Mr. McKee, you will have 10 minutes to make your public presentation.
Okay, if we could, I don't believe we can see it very well, but I'm gonna get started.
We can turn the lights out if that would.
There, it seems to be getting brighter as we go along. All right, I'm George McKee. I own Brownsville Station Apartments. It's in a complex in Starkville. on Wood Street and Washington Street. And we're at the center of Starkville. That's our logo. We've got about 100 units in Starkville altogether. And the question is, before the board, is it appropriate or legal to include the Brownsville Station property owned by me, George McKee, in the proposed Overseas Historical District? Here's an aerial view of our property. And this area here is property that I've been buying with my own money over the last 10 to 15 years for purposes of development. Here is a map of the proposed Overstreet Historical District. I'm watching my stopwatch here because last time I ran out of time. The red here is what they proposed, and the blue here is our apartment complex. And down here is Highway 12, and that's Main Street. Just to acquaint you, we run a real clean, attractive place where, as you can see, all the kids drive nice cars. They go to Main Street to shop mostly and eat. Those are some of our units. I go back a little bit. If you notice here, we have a full-time police officer that lives there, Officer Shane Kelly, who lives in an apartment that we provide for him at no charge. All right, moving along, those are some of our properties. More, just to acquaint you with it, that's the entrance to our complex on Wood Street. And going back, here's our schematic, the same one you looked at before. Here's our area, just on the edge of what they're proposing for the Overstreet Historic District. Now, here's the interesting part. Lot 21 and 22 are this vacant land that I mentioned a minute ago. Neither one of these parcels has anything built on it. They're separate tax parcels with no structure whatsoever. The green line is what they are proposing to include into the historic district. Lot 22 significantly has access all the way to Washington Street right here. And it was bought with access. As you can see, the proposed historic district wants to cut off that access, take all of Lot 21 and then go and take all of this. And this is important because right now, I can't build anything on that without going to the Historic Preservation Commission and getting what they call a certificate of appropriateness. And I tried to file a site plan. Yes, sir.
So you want to be excluded?
Yes, sir.
Okay, this
I
is
want to be
included.
totally excluded.
Okay.
Right. And so, yeah, I want to make that clear. Lot 22 and 21 are separate tax parcels and have no structure on them whatsoever. And, right, I'm opposed to being included in this because last week I tried to file a preliminary site plan, and I was told I couldn't even file it without a certificate of approval from the Historic Preservation Commission, even though this board has not even adopted the thing.
Who told you that?
Ms. Lynn did.
Did.
You want me to explain?
Please.
Once the Historic Preservation Commission adopted the standards and recommended them forward to the board, there's a 6-month window in which they're considered to be in effect until the board acts on it.
So, that answer your question? I mean, I'm using up my time, so I'm gonna move on, but, so the question is, you know, historic preservation versus development. It's simple. Did you create the Historic Preservation Commission to deal with development issues, to try to stop development in this city? Is undeveloped land suitable for inclusion in a historic development district? This is Brownsville Station. I think it's a wise use of land in the city. These are the taxes we paid in 2013, $65,954. $5,000 more we paid for other property in Block 42 that is not part of Brownsville Station, because those are some houses that we bought up and we're rehabbing, houses that have been abandoned. I've got to move on. We have 154 existing bedrooms located 1/2 mile from Main Street. We feed Main Street, folks. We support you. We're proposing to develop this land, lot 22, with a development of 58 bedrooms right there. The proposed tax revenue from block phase 2 would be 6 7-plexes, 16 cottages, estimated ad valorem taxes $60,923 a year. That's based upon the fact that I pay the 15% assessment on the true value, as opposed to a homeowner who pays 10%. Phase 3, let's go back, would include this area here, which is also proposed to be included in the district. Estimated tax revenue on that would be $74,063 per year. Total additional tax revenue over the $90,000 that I already paid would be $134,986. Again, based upon what it cost me to build it, 15% assessment, millage on the 15%. Lot 22 and 21 are separate. They have no structures whatsoever. Here's what they define in the code as a historical development district: a group of 2 or more tax parcels and their structures, maybe an entire neighborhood of structures, linked by a historical association or historical development, again referring to structures. It is not necessary that all the structures have the same primary style. Again, structures. All the way through, you're talking about structures. When you created the historical development people, the preservation committee, you're interested in preserving structures. What they're doing is trying to stop development. That's not right. It conflicts with the state law. Mississippi state law does not include for property that does not contain some structure. Mississippi state law does not provide for a certificate of appropriateness for resources during the nomination phase, nor does it provide for a 6-month moratorium while the property is even being proposed. Mississippi law requires a majority vote of the Historical Preservation Committee to nominate. The city ordinance only requires 3 of 7. Right there, conflict of state law. Mississippi state law requires for a certificate of appropriateness only after a resource has been reviewed and approved. That would mean you guys approve it. Bottom line, Mississippi Code section, chapter 67, municipal code is not legally sufficient. Should be tabled and killed. Undeveloped land with no structure is not legally intended to be includable in a historic preservation district. It is not in the best interest of the citizens to include this property in the Overstreet Historic Preservation District. This ordinance is fatally flawed.
Maintain decorum. Please refrain from responding.
So that uses up my time. Can I
It
have
does.
a couple
Now-
of other seconds?
Well, now we'll hear questions or comments
Okay.
from the members of the board for you. Do we have any questions or comments from the members of the board? Any questions or comments? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. McKee.
Yes, sir.
All right, at this time, we're going to move into our public hearings on the historic preservation ordinances. And you have 3 separate ordinances, so we will have 3 separate public hearings. Those are for the proposed Greensboro Historic Preservation District, the proposed Nash Street Historic Preservation District, and the proposed Overstreet Historic Preservation District. Now, in a moment, I'm going to have Dr. Fazio and Bill Snowden come and make introductory comments about the historic preservation districts. And I'll ask that you make your comments all-encompassing, if possible, about all three of the proposed ordinances. And then we'll hear comments from the members of the board. Then we'll hear comments from the public. Now, some of you may have general comments on historic preservation policies. If that's the case, then please feel free to choose which public hearings or all of the public hearings that you'd like to make comments on. Some of you may be here for a specific district because you have property in that district. I would ask that you be cognizant of the agenda and try to make your comments during the appropriate public hearing. At this time, Dr. Fazio, are you ready to present? And Mr. Snowden, are you going to present as well?
I'll be back up, Dr. Fazio.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, let me give you a brief chronology of what has taken place. This board, the Board of Aldermen, in May 2010, created the ordinance that caused there to be a preservation commission. We held our first meeting in August of 2010, and in October of 2010, we voted to pursue 3 local historic districts. In December of 2010, we applied for certified local government status for the city of Starkville. That was so that we could raise grant funds. In February of 2011, we received CLG status. In March of 2011, we submitted a proposal matched by the city so that we could resurvey the Overstreet School Historic District. In March of 2011, we submitted a proposal with funds matched by the Starkville Central Neighborhood Foundation for the monies to prepare the standards, and those standards are this book for which you're seeing some of the artwork for the cover. December 2011, January 2012, individual citizens resurveyed the Nash Street Historic District and the Greensboro Street Historic District. July of 2012, our consultant, David Preziosi, completed the standards that I have here. Also in August of 2012, those went forward to the city attorney for review, and then that meant that in September 2012, we started our process for public hearings. Our commission then held its own public hearings at the beginning of this year, and then we find ourselves in this room tonight. Let me define a few terms quickly. Local historic districts are different than National Register districts. Prior to this time, there were 3 residential National Register districts, the same ones, Nash Street, Overstreet, and Greensboro Street. We have roughly followed the outlines of those National Register districts for our local districts. Federal and state tax credits. The commission has nothing to do specifically with that, but I think there are a lot of property owners in Starkville who don't know that there's a 25% tax credit, off the top tax credit for residential properties available that are contributing properties in an historic district available from the state, as well as a 20% tax credit for revenue producing properties available from the federal government. Differentiating between the terms restoration and rehabilitation, we're really talking here about rehabilitation. Restoration means putting something back exactly the way that it was at some prior time. That's possible, but it's not something that is required with the kind of standards that I have here. I'm using that word standards. There is another term with that phrase in it, Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. That comes from the National Park Service. That's the national guideline for rehabilitation, and it covers those tax credits. And that's the basis also for we conform to those in our standards. There are already many local historic districts throughout the state of Mississippi, including West Point, Aberdeen, Columbus, Louisville, Hattiesburg, and I would also say that what is being proposed here is for historic properties is similar to what is already in place by virtue of deed restrictions and subdivision regulations for new subdivisions. As I said, we already have 3 National Register districts. The Starkville Historic Preservation Commission is proposing 3 local districts. And what is covered here, and you'll see it in the graphic in just a moment, is that any changes beyond normal maintenance to the outside of a structure require, and you've heard that phrase, a certificate of appropriateness. And if we do this, it will assure the preservation of the historic character of these districts. And studies across the country have shown that using this kind of process increases property values, increases the level of home ownership, increases the length of time that people retain their homes, and increases neighborhood cohesiveness, in addition to making citizens aware of the federal and state tax credits. So I need technical assistance here. I'm trying an arrow and not getting a response. Okay. Okay, good. You would find in this document the chart, the flow chart that you see here. And what it's showing you is, let's suppose you wanted to do something to the inside of a building. Well, you're looking at that down here. The COA is not required. You can do anything on the inside that you want. Only exteriors are included, and that's not landscapes. The only thing in a landscape that would be included are outbuildings or fences and walls. And if you are going to make a change to an exterior, or you're going to build a new structure, or you're going to demolish a structure, then you fall into this category right here. It requires a COA before you can receive a building permit. And this is what the COA application looks like. We worked long and hard for a document that would be simple. It's the front and back of one sheet. So over in this column, you've got essentially the instructions for how to do it. Here's your basic owner information. Then it asks you for what kind of project. Is it new? Is it a substantial change? Is it a minor change? Is it demolition? Is it relocation? Then it asks you, well, if you're doing this work, are you going to work on the roof, on the windows or dormers? Are you going to work on shutters, whatever, or a combination of those? And those become pertinent when you flip the sheet over. Here again, more instructions, and this is really what's required. It says, if you're going to make a change in your roof, well, what are you going to change? Or if you're going to make a change in the windows, well, what are you going to change? And that's where this big document actually comes in this line right here of exterior changes. Because, it looks pretty substantial, but if you start peeling out what's really in here, well, there's usual introduction, discussion of preservation practices, a discussion of the COA, a discussion of general maintenance with just suggestions, because you don't have to have permission to do any general maintenance. I'll come back to this in a minute. And eventually get around to additions, and then here's outbuildings. There's also a section on the history of architecture pertinent to Starkville. Landscape, just recommendations. It's not really covered by the COA. So the bulk of what's in here are in these categories right here. That's essentially walls. There's roofs, windows, doors, so on, porches, and so on. So that if you're gonna do something with windows, you go to this section and it tells you what to do. It tells you what's the proper remedy for whatever situation you have so that you're able to fill out that COA. So we have attempted, as I said, to make it a very simple and straightforward process, and I think it is so. And as I said, we're not talking about Williamsburg, a kind of restoration to return Starkville to some way it was in the past, or to make it something that it never has been in the past. The guidelines for any changes that would be made are the buildings that are already here. That is doing something that is in keeping with what is already here. It's no more complicated than that. Now, that being said, I would be glad to answer any questions. Yes.
Alderman Carver.
You spoke about the roof a couple times. What about like an emergency situation and somebody needs to replace their roof? Do they have to wait on the certificate of appropriateness to replace the roof, or?
Well, in other words, if you had a shingle roof and it blew off, and you're gonna put a shingle roof back, you just put a shingle roof back. That's really a maintenance issue. If you've got a fascia on your house and the woodpeckers have been after it, and you wanna take it down and put it back up, fine. Anything that you do that's just replacing what's already there, you don't ask anybody about it.
Okay.
Further questions or comments from the members of the board? Any further questions or comments from the members of the board? Seeing none, thank you, Dr. Fazio. And prior to hearing from the public, are there any comments from the members of the board? Any comments? All right, seeing none, we're going to move into the public comment portion of our Greensboro district hearing on historic preservation. And the way we will conduct this public hearing is we will hear an alternating fashion from those who wish to speak for the historic preservation ordinance related to Greensboro, and those who wish to speak against the historic preservation ordinance related to Greensboro. Each speaker will have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your comments. Each side will have a total maximum of 15 minutes collectively. So at this time, is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Greensboro Historic District? And please introduce yourself as you come forward, state your name and your residence. Also, I tell you, we can streamline this a little bit. There is a sign-up sheet at the table.
Okay.
Could you go ahead and circulate that so everybody doesn't have to sign up individually before they make their comments? If you are here and if you think you might make comments, or you are just here to be present and counted regarding historic preservation matters tonight, please sign the sign-in sheet as it comes around.
My name is Jamie Mixon, and I live at 510 Greensboro Street, and I've been a member of Starkville Central Neighborhood Foundation, and my husband and I have lived in historic neighborhoods in Starkville since 1985. So we were very much just right out of school when we bought our first historic house, and it was built in 1897. It's in the Overstreet Historic District, and we renovated that house. We lived there for 18 years, and now we live at Greensboro Street for the last 10 years. And I'll try to keep this to 3 minutes. But what I would like to do is just read an excerpt from my letter. And I first sent this letter to all of you and to the mayor in February, and I sent it again today with a few additions to it. So representing my husband and I, David and Jamie Nixon. My husband and I are in strong support of the official designation of the 3 local historic districts and the approval of the supporting standards for these districts. And like I said, we've lived in the Greensboro Historic District since 2003 and Overstreet Historic District for 18 years prior to that. We raised our sons here, and we consider Starkville truly our adopted home. Most new neighborhoods have covenants that protect home and property values. We are simply asking the same respect for Starkville's 3 historic neighborhoods. And this will not cause any undue burden upon the homeowners, but will ensure that their investment is protected. We totally believe that we need for our neighbors to be investing in their property so that our property remains valuable. There are more than 2,300 local historic districts that have standards in the United States, and many of these are already in place in progressive, forward-thinking small towns and larger cities in Mississippi. And I'm going to take this moment to read to you what towns have local districts, and not just the national districts, but local districts. Corinth, Kosciuszko, Cleveland, Carrollton, Alcorn, Port Gibson, West Point, Hazelhurst, Hernando. Hattiesburg has 5 local districts. Grenada has 2. Biloxi has 6. Jackson has 5. Raymond, West Mississippi. Laurel, Oxford, our neighbor to the north, has 5 local historic districts. Meridian, Carthage, Tupelo, Greenwood, Canton, Aberdeen has 2. Winona, Como, Sardis, Macomb, Baldwin, Natchez, Brandon, Indianola, Tunica, Vicksburg, Leland, Eupora, Centerville, and Yazoo City. And these are not, I purposely avoided military and single kind of designations. These are local districts, exactly what we're asking for in Starkville, Mississippi. And these have been in place since the 1980s, and I do not see them coming down and somehow crashing and having a disaster from having local districts. I'm sure it has enhanced their towns, and they value their historic districts. And I would like to say, I wish that all of us would go visit starkville.org. Because at the top of that is the new branding for Starkville, Mississippi. The logo states Historic Starkville, Mississippi's college town. We are promoting ourselves as a historic town, and we're proud of it. It's a branding. We are branding ourselves this way, and I would hope that we will back those words up and that we aren't putting false advertising out there about our historic areas. It's very important that we protect these areas and that we respect these areas in the way that new neighborhoods are respected. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nixon. Now, is there anyone wishing to speak against the Greensboro Street, or the Greensboro Historic District?
Mr. Snowden asked that I project the districts, so I'll go do that.
I'm Tom Carskadden. I have lived on Greensboro Street nearly 40 years. It's beautiful now. It was beautiful then. There are no monsters on Greensboro Street, presently or inbound. The ordinance sounds like something progressive, but really it's a solution to a problem that does not exist. Walk down the street. It is beautiful, as it has been for 40 years. I could show you outstandingly restored homes that would not meet these standards. These standards have nothing to do with safety, nothing to do with property use or zoning. That's all covered in other ordinances. It boils down to aesthetics, to a degree where the government would be saying, here's what your front door may or may not look like if you care to replace it. I don't think the city government has any business telling me that I have to have a solid front door or one with an oval window or one with little square panes or whatever. An intrusion of this magnitude really requires a compelling governmental and community interest. And there is no such need. We're doing fine this way. Property values, there's nothing wrong with property values on Greensboro Street. If they go any higher, you'll have to be a millionaire to live there. I've heard it said, well, it might generate tourism. Well, our tourists on Greensboro Street are the people who come from all over town to walk through there, to jog through there. They're welcome to be there, but I don't think we have an obligation to provide a living museum for them or for anybody else. Security is another issue. Certain commonly used security measures are outlawed. What if somebody asked to have some kind of device like that, was denied, and then there was a violent intrusion? Would the city be liable? And would you want that on your conscience? It seems to me there's been very little compromise. The standards as presented tonight are exactly the same as they have been through all the hearings, even after so many of us have objected. And that doesn't seem like democracy, where you just politely listen and then do what you had in mind the whole time anyway. I think the best compromise is when somebody applies for a building permit in one of these districts, give them a set of standards as recommendations. The advice of architects, historians, etc., is fine and welcome, but for those aesthetic preferences to carry the force of law, I think is entirely inappropriate. I just don't think the city government needs to control my front door. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Skarsgård. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Greensboro Street Historic District? Anyone wishing to speak in favor?
Thank you. I'm Jim Geeson. I live at 305 Greensboro Street, I think in the house that Alderman Carver grew up in, or lived there for a while. I'm in support of this basically because there's a house next door to mine that no one lives in. No one's lived in there for like 10 years. And one of these days, someone is going to own that. Someone new is going to own that property. It's a cute, historic, lovely house that is sort of slowly decaying. Now, someone who inherits that house or buys that house is going to look at that and say it's going to cost a little bit of money to bring that house back to its glory. And it's going to cost a lot less money to knock it down and to put up a plastic house. And that person is going to benefit from being on a historic street for all the things that Dr. Skarsgård said, benefit from a beautiful street, but there's nothing to protect me as I put in more and more effort, money into keeping up my house to protect, my investment and my work in my house. So that's the vague personal interest that I have in this. I would also say that I'm a history professor at State, and so you would think that I would stand up and say, we have to protect this because history is valuable and say a bunch of warm and fuzzy things. I believe all those things, but I also just have personal interests as the property owners on Greensboro Street do. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Geeson. Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Greensboro Street Historic District? Anyone now wishing to speak against?
I'm Kim Stevens. I actually live in the Overstreet District, but I have some general issues with the way this is being done, and I'm also a realtor who hasn't been able to show a house that's in the Greensboro District to people, at least two people, because when they found out that it might become part of the historical district, they didn't want to have to mess with somebody dictating to them how their front door looked, or if they did want to change their roof, getting permission to do it. Earlier you were saying if in an emergency situation you can replace the roof the same as it was without going to get a certificate of appropriateness. If my roof blows off, that might be the time I would like to put a different kind of roof on. And frankly, I don't think I should have to ask your permission or Dr. Fazio's permission or anybody else's permission about what kind of roof I'm going to put on my house, as long as it meets the basic building codes and the zoning codes. As far as our having historic town of Starkville on our website, certainly we need to pass a law to back up a design logo that somebody thought would be cool. So, let's change the historic district so that we have to abide by somebody else's opinion of what the aesthetic should be. And one piece of history that I don't think anybody's brought up is this came up about 10 years ago and was voted down in a public election. And if we're going to take away my property rights, I would like to see that on a ballot someplace and a super majority of each of those neighborhoods vote for it. You're discriminating against these three areas. Starkville's not that big, and you're picking out these three downtown areas out of, this would be cool to have. Oxford has it, we need to have one. So I just think you guys are tampering with our basic property rights that you should never even think about. Standards are great, give us advice if somebody wants to do it, but don't devalue somebody's property because somebody else doesn't want to buy it because they have to abide by 10 people's determination of what aesthetics are.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. All right, is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor?
Hi, my name is Jason Ward. Unfortunately, currently own 2 houses on Greensboro Street. Recently moved up the street into 505 Greensboro Street, which is a National Historic Register home from the 1880s. We moved up the street looking forward to potentially having the type of protections and the type of incentives to put into a home where a young family, I have an 11-month-old baby, and we were looking forward to doing that and to doing that as part of this initiative, this historic neighborhood district. So that's pretty short and sweet. I'm glad that real estate was brought up because I also have a house at 610 Greensboro Street, which is not in the district, but I'm also concerned that the rhetoric and the I think sincere concerns of those who are opposed to this is also spilling over into areas and to issues that it shouldn't. For example, and I'll leave it at this, I'm currently trying to sell this property, which is not in the historic district, which happens to be on Greensboro Street, and which seems to be right now a casualty of a political controversy of which it should have no part. It's a house with vinyl siding. It's not a historic property, but yet I hear that there are people, scared to buy it because of the supposed historic district, which it is not even a part of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed ordinance? Yes, sir. Oh, wait, I've got 2 of you.
My name's Ginger Carver, and I don't know where the gentleman is, but my husband and I restored the house on 305 Greensboro Street in 1996. That house was 3 apartments, and my husband and I worked ourselves to restore that property, and I think we did a wonderful job. I think the realtors were pleased with what we did, and I think the community was improved as a result of our hard work. But we would not have been able to do that if we had had to come to someone and ask them for permission to do everything that we did. However, if you go back and look at the house before, with the grill out on the front and not painted, no loving, tender care, you can tell that we did make a difference. And then today we live on Green Street, and the house we live in now is, it used to be the First Baptist Church daycare. That house has vinyl siding now, and we bought it with the vinyl siding because we wanted the vinyl siding, because we didn't want to pay to have that house painted every time it needed to be painted. If I had known that it was going to be historical, I wouldn't have bought it. So you would have still had that house with, and it was in pretty disarray. We spent several thousands of dollars to repair and restore that house back into a residential property. And our yard was on the Art and Garden Tour last year, so we've done a lot to that house ourselves. And it's just real upsetting to me to think that somebody's going to come in now and tell me what I can and can't pick out and choose and do within my means. Because if you drive by my house and look at it, it's one of the nicer homes on that street. But it's because my husband and I worked hard. And another point I want to make, I really don't understand how you're going to legislate this when you can't get people to mow their yards, around the corner from me. So, I mean, I think that's something that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carver. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor? Anyone now wishing to speak in favor? Is there anyone now wishing to speak against? Yes, sir.
Back it up here. I'll make mine pretty short. I'm
I'm Mike Barnes. My wife Martha and I live at 506 Greensboro. It's right at the split of Whitfield. I want to say that I concur with Tom. I don't really need the government worrying about my front door, about what I do with my property. We spent considerable numbers of dollars getting that house and restoring it. And now you're gonna tell me that I have to go to some commission, that I have to wade through, and no offense, Dr. Fazio, 146 pages of stuff. At least, the very least you can do is the things that don't need a COA is to take that out of the pamphlet. You don't need it. I'm soon going to replace my roof. I understand now that I don't have to go through that to get my roof replaced. But I didn't know it before I came to this meeting. So I just don't see that we need, it's almost like Obamacare, you know, you gotta pass it so you can read and see what's in it. And I don't think it's the business of this community and its leadership to force upon the populace something they wouldn't have put on them. But, you know, I wonder how many of you live in the historic district, sitting up that table right there. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance?
My name is Michelle Jones. I've worked for the Department of Archives and History as the Certified Local Government Coordinator. I've worked with the City of Starkville since it became a Certified Local Government.
Please refrain from interacting in the audience. He said he couldn't hear.
I need to. I work for the Department of Archives and History in the Historic Preservation Division. I'm the Local Government Assistance Coordinator, and I've worked with the City of Starkville since it became a Certified Local Government in February of 2011. The Historic Preservation Commission has worked with the Department of Archives and History, and we approved the methodology and the boundaries of the proposed historic districts. I'm here to offer any technical assistance that you, or to answer any questions that you might have in terms of preservation. I work with 33 other communities in the northern part of the state with their preservation policy and local historic districts.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the ordinance? Anyone now wishing to speak against the Greensboro Street historic ordinance?
I'm Joe Buckner. I'm from Starkville. I live in Brandon. I don't own any property in Greensboro Street, but I think as Ms. Nixon said, she's speaking for her husband and herself that lived on Greensboro Street. I'd like to try to speak for all the citizens of Starkville, especially the ones that are not highly educated or they don't have a lot of money, and ask the board to consider, why are we even considering historical districts? And I think, is it to keep certain people out of those neighborhoods? Is it so that only the wealthy can live in those neighborhoods? And if that's the case, then to me, I think the people that live in those neighborhoods and that want the historical districts should go buy a new home in a gated community and leave the people that own homes there to themselves to work their own property. This does not seem like the country that I was raised up in. So those are my words, and that's for the Greensboro district and all the districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buckner. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Greensboro District ordinance? Anyone now wishing to speak in favor? Anyone now wishing to speak in favor? Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Greensboro Historic ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak for, against, or indifferent to the proposed Greensboro Street Historic ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak on the Greensboro Street ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak? Seeing no one, that will conclude the public comment portion of this, our first public hearing on the Greensboro Street Historic Ordinance. At this time, we'll hear any concluding comments from the members of the board.
I've got a few before we go in. There was some discussion by Mr. McKee about legal issues. Chris, can you comment on any of that or any of the issues that he discussed?
I've taken note of them and I'll look into them and advise accordingly.
And then I've got a question for Michelle. It seems that there may be some, from a factual standpoint, I know there's been conversation or discussion of facts on home values increasing, but there's also been some discussion tonight of devalued property and difficulty of sales associated with these types of, is there any empirical data of that type of fact? Maybe.
There is, the National Trust for Historic Preservation has done economic studies of local historic districts. There are also some comparable, there's a really good study of Athens, Georgia, which I would hope historical would be, another SEC town dealing with property values in local historic districts. And in those findings, they showed that within local historic districts, you have a larger spectrum of house values. You have high end, but you have properties that are within the median and low range as well.
But nothing that suggests that it's more difficult to sell a home within those areas, or is that anywhere within those studies?
I've never seen that, I've never seen that. I'm not saying it does not exist.
And that was a historic trust study?
From the Athens Park County Historical Foundation.
Thank you.
Any further comments from the members of the board? Alderman Vaughn.
I agree with the citizens that said that if we're gonna do this, we should put it on a ballot, because we're taking their rights, and if not do it on ballot, we should do it on a petition, 80% of the petition. But first, you're just taking their rights, and I often say that we are here to serve the people and not for the people to serve us. And that's the way I look at it. And all these citizens are here for our help, not for our hurts. And that's the way we should be looking at it, here to serve them. We was elected to serve these people, not for them to serve us. And it seemed like, I often say it at this board, we seem like more time that we was elected for them to serve us and not serve them as citizens. That's why they elected us, to make good, wise, sound decisions for them. And I feel just like some of them feel. I don't feel like just come to my house and tell me what I should do and how I should do, what to put on it, what not to put on it. I talked to one of the aldermen about the same thing. I feel like we violating their rights.
Further comments by the members of the board? Alderman Carver.
If I'm gonna have to pick a district, I guess I'll pick Greensboro Street to comment on, but, these are just points upon the things I've been writing over the last 2 days as constituents call me, voicing both sides, and there's been a lot of letters. I will applaud everybody for getting involved with this and having a good turnout, but of all the greatness and the things that I've only been associated with Greensboro Street since about 1995, but all that's been done in the current setup that's happened. It's the homeowners getting out there, and it's the homeowners that have been progressive in renovating those homes. And I mean, y'all seen the homes over the last 20, 25 years. I just seen that district come back to life, and it's great. I mean, it is one of the prettiest streets in the city of Starkville, and that's done because of the homeowners. And if something's not broken, don't fix it. They spoke about the simplicity of this, and I think it's not simple. You look at that diagram, I know it's kind of hard to see, but that's not a simple diagram of what you got to do and what process. And my mom spoke to the point of we were renovating that, and these homeowners over the last 15 or 20, 25 years, a lot of these renovations happen pretty fast. You come by in 6 or 8 months, a year later, and they're done. And that's an expedited process, because it's not involved with the bureaucratic levels, that you've got to go and get something checked every time you want to add another building or tear something down or fix something. Just a side note, a lot of times in here, I'm kind of getting agitated. I hear Charleston, South Carolina often mentioned. We're not a Charleston, South Carolina, and I know the realtors are probably agreeing with this. We need to do everything we can do to get people here, and that's not just from a residential standpoint, but a commercial. I like Charleston. I mean, I think it's a great area, but at the same time, anything we do to limit the influx of people in town, I just think this is kind of too restrictive. This is getting into the area where you're trying to tell a property owner what he and she can't do, and I think it's a little, I wouldn't use the word socialistic, but it's getting a little intrusive. You're going to ask me, you're going to tell me I can't do something on my own home. I'm going to have issues with that. And so I guess back to the last thing before I wrap it up is, what is the enforcement for that? If it's an emergency situation, I'm just using the extreme, I'm going to go there, but if my roof blows off, but I've always wanted to replace my roof, and there's a reason, maybe it was leaking, it was sagging, and it finally gave out. What's the enforcement if I go? What are you going to do to me if I actually want to change something on my home without the Historic Preservation Commission's approval? So I guess that's my open-ended question. And I know, Dr. Fazio, y'all have done a lot of work, and I think, let me back up before I give you that. I know Dr. Fazio is concerned about the area, and I, as a property owner in Starkville, everybody's concerned about property values, or you wouldn't be a homeowner, you'd be a renter. But I just think that maybe we could step back, and my biggest concern, I think, is that the citizens as a whole don't feel like they were maybe included in this. I got a lot of people that say, just give me a voice, give me an opinion. So I think they definitely have the right idea. The right idea is to protect property values. I think everybody in here has got that's common sense. You want to do that, but I think it may be a new way. The new way may be to back up and make sure we have some meetings, and just like we have homeowners association where I live, but get together and find out what everybody's collectively feeling instead of a few trying to push their will on the majority. Does that make sense? So, back to Dr. Fazio, I do appreciate your time and I appreciate your work, but what is the enforcement for me if I'm gonna replace something that I didn't get a certificate of appropriateness for? What's the enforceable? What are the teeth in the ordinance? Are you?
That was not something that we could deal with in your original ordinance that you had.
Yes, sir. So do y'all envision some kind of monetary fine or some kind of?
We don't envision anything. It's in the ordinance as passed by the board.
Okay. What are the monetary fines?
Well, it's a fairly lengthy detail. What someone said is there earlier, there's teeth in it. Yeah, there would be teeth in it. The issue of getting people to mow their grass. So there would be a way to enforce it. Okay. Again, we didn't do that.
Yes, sir.
The board created that.
Yes, sir. Just in wrapping it up, I think y'all know how I stand. I feel that the protection of property rights is what this meeting is about, and everybody here wants that. And you see that happening. You see an increase in property values. I know on Greensboro Street. I'm not so sure about the other two, but it may be time to go back to the drawing board and incorporate everybody here. If everybody here's got an opinion, and a lot of these people, tonight is the first time. One gentleman said it's the first time he's heard some of this. Some of these details, but maybe time to go back to the drawing board and start over and take this in there, and like everything in local government, you got checks and balances and tweak things here and there, and find out what works and get everybody on the same page and find something that does protect the property rights in these 3 historic districts. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Vaughn.
One question, why are we pushing this at the end of our term? This at the end of our term. Why did this come up at the end of the term? Why are we pushing this so hard at the end of the term? We're getting ready to have a new board. So why are we pushing this so hard now?
Well, I think, Dr. Fazio, you gave a chronological account there of this going back till 1st of 2012, did it go into 2011? 2010. So this has been about why this is coming in at the end of our term.
We got 2 more meetings?
Well, because it took such a long time. We had to, all the grant cycles, the length of time it takes to then do the standards, the length of time that it takes to do resurvey the historic district. It took a lot of work. The commission worked steadily. And in fact, the issue of whether or not people are aware of what we were doing, we were covered. We met once a month, and we were covered steadily on the front page of the newspaper with features
So in short, this process began and multiple steps taken by this board that dated back to 2010. Right.
Any further comments from the members of the board? Any further comments on the Greensboro Street ordinance prior to concluding the hearing? No, we're in board comments now. Any further comments from the members of the board? All right, seeing none, that will conclude the first public hearing on the Greensboro Street historic preservation ordinance. We'll now have our first public hearing on the adoption of the Nash Street Historic District. And seeing as the matter was thoroughly introduced, if it pleases the board, I'm going to move directly into any introductory board comments at this point. All right, are there any introductory board comments? Are there any introductory board comments? Seeing none, we're going to move right along to the citizen comment portion of this public hearing. And it'll be conducted in the exact same format as the previous public hearing. We'll begin by hearing anyone wishing to speak for the proposed ordinance.
I'm Pete Melby, and I'm a resident of Starkville since 1978. I moved here from Atlanta, and I live in the College View neighborhood. I'm the president of the College View Neighborhood Association, and I pretty much speak for the 60 families we have in that neighborhood. We are very excited about the board's effort to recognize the importance of historic districts with identifiable character in Starkville. That's so important. It's a small town that's growing up. And that's what small towns that want to be something do. They recognize their assets. We have the Old Main District, and there's been a lot of emphasis on downtown, and we're calling it the Old Main District and emphasizing its flavor and character. When we decided we were historic in the College View neighborhood, we hired an architectural historian to help us understand what we had. And Alderman Vaughn, we wouldn't have known without that expertise. And I renovated a couple of houses in the Nash Street Historic District, which is recognized by the National Register of Historic Districts, according to what this historical preservation specialist said. So we're all learning, and we know that we have something special over there. I want to conclude by saying that identifiable character is so important. If this city didn't have areas of special character, then it would be generic. And we know that that's not what makes up a good town, a good city. It's important to have specialized areas. And it also makes good business sense. There are people that won't move to a community, a city that doesn't have historical neighborhoods, and they'll just bypass it. They don't want to live in a new neighborhood, and that's appealing to the variety of people's interests, just like we've heard about here. And if we don't preserve historic neighborhoods in Starkville, we'll lose them. They'll be eroded, and that identifiable character will be lost.
4 or 5 homes that are just north of the railroad there.
Okay. Any further introductory comments by the members of the board? Any further introductory comments by the members of the board? All right, seeing none, we'll move to the public comment portion of the public hearing on the Overstreet District. Is there now anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Overstreet District? Anyone now wishing to speak in favor? Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Overstreet District?
Hi, my name's Liz Collier, and I have a really different perspective than all these people that have been speaking tonight, because from 1988 until December 12th, I lived at 511 South Jackson. It was destroyed by fire. Now, because of the 6-month time period, I can't rebuild, because I have to go thank you, Mr. Vaughn, that's my alderman. I have to get approval with a COA that meets all the historical district requirements. Even though my home burned in December, the ordinance didn't go into effect till February. I'm bound by that until August 26th. Now, that kind of leaves me with, do I wait till August 26th to see if the board is going to do something to vote against the district? That's 3 months from now. The house got cleared this week. Do I work through the COA? And I don't know if y'all have read the ordinance. I have read every word of it. To do new construction, you do have to meet so many guidelines, including showing proof that you can financially complete the project. Is that anybody's business? The same thing is true if you say you have an economic hardship. You've got to provide them with 2 years of your financial records. I'm not doing that. I've lived in Starkville since 1988. I am not doing all that. My third option is to move out of South Jackson Street, because y'all are leaving me no option unless I can get the board to exempt my piece of property where there was no home at the time the ordinance went into effect. It's the last house on Jackson Street in that district. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Collier. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Overstreet ordinance? Anyone now wishing to speak in favor?
Kathy Sherman Morris. I just purchased a house in the Overstreet district, and we'll be moving there later this summer when we sell our current house. And I didn't really come prepared to speak, but I thought I should be someone speaking in favor of this. As a new property owner, this district has, or the proposed district has, a high number of properties that are not owner occupied. They're owned by people that don't live in Starkville or Mississippi or the district specifically. And people that have income properties care about generating income. So as someone that wants to live in live in this area, I'm concerned about protecting the area around my house and preventing choices that are made solely in the interest of generating revenue by the property owner. And I understand that, it's your house, you want to do these things to generate the income. But some of the decisions that have already been made in this district were not made in the interest of the whole area. They were made in the interest of the person that owns the house. And I'd like to see, going into the future, a little protection for my investment as a homeowner.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Is there anyone now wishing to speak? Yes, sir.
My name's Lloyd Rose, and I've been in Starkville a long time. Came here in 1960 to the scene of my wife's childhood in Starkville. She grew up here, and we've been living here and raising our family and since 1960. And as my retirement, I planned to make certain improvements in Starkville. I love Starkville. The reason we came back here mainly was because it was a college town. Also, we had relatives here, but it was a college town, and we liked a college town, and we like the environment, the atmosphere of it, and the people, the varied people that we have in a college town. We liked it. We liked it in 1960. We still like it in 2013. And I'm a retired dentist now. I practiced dentistry in Starkville for over 40 years. But now I have an apartment complex, and it's called Colonial Arms Apartments and Townhouses. And it was developed slowly over a period of many years, like 40 years, as property ran down or was left unlived in, whatever. And it just so happened that over about a 15, 20-year period, I was able to get all of the lots in a particular part, between Vine Street and South Montgomery Street and going down Gillespie, that entire block. I don't know whether I can point to this or not. Can I? Oh, well.
Use that.
Oh, okay, good. Well, okay, is it no? No. Okay. Okay, here we are. This is Colonial Arms Apartments. It's a big, there are 32 townhouse units here now. And then this is a lot, and these are lots, and all these are lots. The total is 79 units in Colonial Arms Apartments. About, in 1988, I believe it was, some 25 years ago, I bought this property across the street. And I've been renting this as is since that time, but I've been putting it off, from 1 year to the next. Next year, I'm gonna redevelop that spot. And frankly, in my old age, I kind of got lazy. And so just hadn't done it until now. But it needs to be done because, it would be an
Dr.
improvement
Rhodes.
to that part of town.
Your time's expired, but seeing as we haven't hit our full 30 minutes yet, without objection, I'm gonna extend you an extra
Okay.
minute.
Well, I tell you, Mr. McKee covered my situation perfectly. And so I just won't go any further because he said everything that I had to say. I think it's important to have people who love Starkville and who want to see it develop in business and in residence. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Dr. Rhodes. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Overstreet district?
I'm Alice Carol Caldwell, and I moved here in 1972, and I live right across from Dr. Rose, and he's a wonderful neighbor. I bought my house because it cost $15,000. I have lived in Sherwood Forest, and I could not afford Sherwood Forest. And I have loved the mixed neighborhood. In the past, we've had a very strong neighborhood association. We do not have that now, and it's a shame because that's what Mr. Melby talked about, that they have a strong meeting of the minds because they have meetings. And I think that's something that all of us would benefit from, knowing our neighbors and knowing how we think. However, I'm the third owner of our house at 403 Gillespie Street. It's 1905. I love it. Basically, it stayed the same. I have vinyl siding, and I'm not planning to change my vinyl siding, and I don't think the historic district is telling me to change it. I'm grandfathered in, and when I had to change my railings on the front, I wanted it to go back to the historic way, and the code told me it had to be higher. It bothered me aesthetically because it's not according to how the house is. However, I had to go according to that. I'm very much in favor of the Overstreet Historic area. I think it has protected us. There are houses on that street, particularly on Gillespie Street, that would not be there otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caldwell. Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the Overstreet district? Anyone wishing to speak against?
My name is Patricia Buckner, and I live at 305 East Gillespie. I am the third generation to live there, and I enjoy being in Starkville. And Gillespie Street has been a wonderful home for us. I'm a realtor, and I delight in taking people on tours through the historic areas on Greensboro Street. Sometimes I drive them through Nash Street, where I did live some years ago. But I think there is a difference between homeowner associations and their guidelines and the Historic Commission guidelines. And that clarification needs to be clear, that when you purchase a home with a homeowner association fees and regulations, you know what they are before you purchase them, and you know what the regulations will be. In this case, we own the homes. They're ours, they've been ours for the longest time, and now we're gonna be told how and what to do with them. And that is completely wrong.
Thank you, Ms. Buckner. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Overstreet ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Seeing no one, is there anyone wishing to speak against the proposed Overstreet ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak against?
My name is Bobby Collier, and I reside on Jackson Street. Everybody's been telling how long they've been here, coming here. I was born here in 1956. My family's been here since 1880. And I know a little bit about history. I'm not real sure why y'all are doing this. There's homes been here 100 years. Hadn't had any ordinances, rules, regulations, and they're doing fine. They might be old, but I think this is a little bit of a unreasonable infringement on property rights and ownership rights, and I don't think that we need any more bureaucracy. And let's see, and if I want to increase my property value, then this may be so as far as getting this done, but I want to do it on my terms and not y'all or the committees. But that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Collier. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Overstreet ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Seeing no one, is there anyone wishing to speak against the proposed Overstreet ordinance?
My name is Brenda Chambliss, and I have actually 3 properties involved. How do I do this little thing?
Oh, just grab the.
This little thing right here. Okay. Green Street. I don't have my glasses, I know. I think I am, well, there, let's see. Well, I'm so sorry. I'm looking for green, there I am. Okay, that's my home, right there. I'm right by the school. Okay, then I also have a business, and right beside that business to the south, I have a little concrete block apartment. I have no idea why it was ever included, because it's just a little concrete block building. So that's probably gonna be a problem, I guess, if I wanted to go back and do anything to it historically. But back to my home, I moved back out of the country to take care of my mother. And what I did, I renovated my mother's house. Had it been under the historic guidelines, I could have probably never done what I did to it. But I'm proud of it, and I think it actually improved our street. We're very proud of our street. We've got some beautiful old homes, but over the course of time, I've seen some beautiful homes torn down and not preserved. I've also seen homes, and I live close to some homes, that the grass is to here. There are hedges growing up onto the porch. So it's difficult for me to watch that happen and rent to college kids. And then, like someone here said, it seems like sometimes the owners of the property don't live here and they're only interested in the income. And maybe we should, like Ben had said earlier, maybe we could come to some sort of an agreement to like keep what we have. That's so important. But maybe just come to terms with some compromise and maybe improve some of the properties that surround what we already have and are proud of.
Thank you, Ms. Shepard. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Overstreet district?
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question? so many people talk about the front doors, that's come over and over. Can Mr. Fazio, talk about that? If we live in the house now, our front door is fine, right? I mean, it seems almost like a fear tactic that we're hearing, and I wonder if there's any clarification.
Dr. Fazio, would you like to address that question?
What about, no one can tell me.
How the historic guidelines would affect a front door?
Well, I think you can take this idea to the absurd level, that you say, well, does the commission determine what the front of the building is like? Well, does the commission have anything to say about the door? Does the commission have anything to say about the hinges on the door? Does the commission have anything to say about the screws in the hinges? We get to the absurd point. You have to say with any commission, the group of citizens, we presume are going to put people on it who are thoughtful, rational, concerned. They're going to make reasonable decisions. And I'm not sure you can say much more. They're certainly not going to be concerned with the screws and the hinges on the door.
Could I ask
Oh,
a question?
no. I shouldn't have ever gone down that road. Let's stick with the format. All right, were we on for or against?
Against. So nobody from four is coming forward, but four is
All right, is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? Anyone now wishing to speak in favor? Anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed ordinance? Yes, sir.
I'm Johnny Buckner. My great-grandfather bought land in 1837 here in Oktibbeha County. It's been my home for all my life, so I've traveled around the world. I value history, and back in 1992, I got documentation from the United States Department of the Interior National Park Service showing that National Register of Historic Places showed the places that we're talking about already registered there as historic places. I don't know the full details of what ramifications are there, but one thing I know, I haven't felt the limitations that it sounds like these standards are going to bring on us. And I have looked at it. I think it is 141 pages, and it concerns me. I think we have a strong building code here for Starkville. And Alderman Carver, I think the question you asked earlier about how this is enforced, I think if we're trying to, from what I understand, if we want to do something to one of our houses in this area, we're going to have to get this certificate of appropriateness before we can get a building permit. And that's just another line of challenges and struggle that I just don't want to have to go through. I think I would like to think that we could trust other people, but I've been in other situations, even here in the city, where I've been with commissions that have told us that we needed to put a building that we'd already drawn plans for at the front of the property instead of the back of the property that we had already designed. And I think I'm able to make decisions on what I want to do with my property. And I understand the need, the idea of the covenant. It sounds like it's more like a covenant that's there at Nash Street. I think if a group of people wanted to enter into covenant, they should do that. But to have standards for historic places in Starkville outlined in that 141-page document that's already affecting us is challenging to me. I'm hoping that you can somehow even answer that question about whether that 6-month period has already started, or are we going to have to go ahead and get a certificate of appropriateness now before you've already agreed to this. I've got concerns about that, so thank you for hearing.
Thank you, Pastor Buckner. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Overstreet District? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Seeing no one, is there anyone wishing to speak against the proposed Overstreet district? All right. Actually, there's a minute and a half left on the cumulative total, but it doesn't look like the other side's going to hit their total. So without objection, I'm going to go ahead and extend you 3 minutes.
I'll be real quick, Mayor. I'm Dan Craig. I have rental property on Lafayette Street. My buildings were built in 1990. I don't know why they're considered of historical value at this present time. I sit right next to commercial property, so I'm really not sure why they're considered in the historical district, being next to commercial property and as the date that they were built of. I feel like that you're just, if this would be passed, you're more or less freezing these structures at times to what they could be, that we couldn't go in and do the, upgrade and do improvements that we wanted to. You're just freezing them as they were built in 1990. I just think that's wrong. I really don't think it's in any place for government to be requiring us to go through a certificate of appropriateness, to go through a flow chart, to go through 140 pages of documents for us to do stuff to our own property that we own, we pay taxes on every year. I don't see there's any place to echo what other people have said. We have the Planning and Zoning Commission. We have the Alderman that regulate codes in the town. I think that should be appropriate. And I just don't want to have to go through another committee. That committee, I don't know how long those tenures would be, but that 7-person commission or 5-person commission, whatever it is, that's going to come and go over time. You're going to deal with different personalities. You're not going to sure who you're going to be dealing with. Whereas we're going to be on these properties for a long time. And lastly, just sort of, I'll echo everything George said, but yes, I do pay a lot of, I am in it for the income. I do pay a lot of income taxes. And every December when I go up here and write that check, I haven't been turned down yet for writing a property tax check. So I think the city's enjoying it.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. All right, that exhausts the time for those wishing to speak against. There is some time remaining for anyone wishing to speak in favor. We can use this as general comment time. How much do we have left?
We've got about 12 minutes left for the.
Okay. Well, Dr. Carskadden, you've already spoken. He has not spoken yet.
My name's McEwen. I don't have
Go ahead
an
and approve.
opinion, but after listening to all this, I've got a lot more questions. You don't seem to want to answer questions. Earlier you said you didn't want to deal with questions. Where can we get more factual information on all this? You mentioned some meetings that were going to take place later when we first started. Can you give us some dates, times? Where can we go to get more facts about all this?
Are the historic guidelines on the website?
Yes, sir, they are.
All right,
Well, I've got that packet. I've read the whole packet.
And
even with that, I think everybody here's got a lot more questions, what's grandfathered in, what isn't, have you made a decision on this?
when is the second public hearing scheduled?
June the 18th.
All right, so the second public hearing would be scheduled June the 18th. That is the.
Can you ask questions at that public hearing?
Generally speaking, the public hearings are designed for comment and not a time to get into a back and forth discussion because it's very difficult to control with a group this size. Now, what I would encourage you to do, if you have questions for me or the members of the board, please do reach out and contact us, ask us questions. I'm here all day during the day. Please feel free to set up a meeting with me. I'm sure members of the Historic Preservation Commission, who are actually much more well-versed on this than any of us are, would be more than willing to sit down with you as well.
Mayor.
Hold on one second. Let's hear final comments from the citizenry. Is there anyone who has not spoken yet tonight? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I have not spoken, and I have a general question. So you're saying there's another public hearing about the historic district on June 18th?
That's right.
Okay, and the election is what date? June 9th?
June 4th.
June 4th, and when will the new board be instated? What's the date for that?
The first week in July.
Okay.
Ma'am, be recognized.
You may.
Answer your question specifically, we'll take off at midnight, July 1 of 2013. Our first meeting will be July 2, 2013.
Okay, and when will the board make a decision on this historic district ordinances?
The board could make a decision June 18th. The board does not have to make a decision on June 18th. They could make a decision on any one of the districts. they could make a decision on all of the districts, or they could choose in some manner to delay that decision on June 18th. Yes, sir.
Since you have some minutes left and I haven't spoken on Overstreet, could I use 3 minutes to speak now?
Sure.
You all know who I am by now and how I feel about the historical district, but I happen to own property in the Overstreet district, and I'd like to read a letter that I wrote to Mr. Vaughn, send him an email, if I may. My name is Joe Buckner, and I'm currently a resident of Brandon, Mississippi. I was born and raised in Starkville, graduated from Starkville High School and MSU. I have 3 brothers, 3 children, and a host of grandchildren, nieces, and nephews that currently live in Starkville. I love Starkville and want nothing but the best for Starkville. I recently inherited a duplex apartment at 401 South Washington Street, which is located across the street from the house that I was raised in. It is my understanding that South Washington Street is part of the planned historical district that the Board of Aldermen will be voting on in the near future. And I understand that you are the alderman for that ward. I'm asking for your assistance to have my duplex apartment at 401 South Washington Street removed from the historical district because it adds no contributing value to the historical district. If you cannot do that, I'm asking that you vote against approving the historical district plan. It is my understanding that my property can be removed from the plan. I do want to share with you that as a person who will always consider Starkville as my real hometown, I was disturbed to find out that a historical district was being considered for the area that included my property, and that I was not notified of this move or of any public meetings where I could have expressed my concerns. I and all of my family members oppose the historical district and would hope that the Board of Aldermen would make sure that it does not pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buckner. All right, I've seen 2 hands previously, and there may have been more. I do apologize. But Dr. Carskadden and Ms. Nixon, those are going to be our last 2 comments that we have time for. Dr. Carskadden.
Okay, very briefly, the example of the front door, Michael, you gave that example in a meeting in the Greensboro Center when this whole thing was being discussed. It's not a scare tactic. It's something that the proponents brought up. Gee, we wouldn't want the wrong kind of front door on a house that doesn't belong to it.
All right, thank you, Dr. Carskadden. Ms. Nixon.
Yes, and it's Mixon.
Mixon, sorry.
Yes, there is a J. It's not. In my letter, actually, and there's a question from Alderman Dumas about this, about economics related to local historic districts. And there's an expert on this. His name is Donovan Rypkema. That's Rypkema, if you want to dig deeper into that. But I have a quote from him, and he has done a lot of studies and compiled a lot of data on local historic districts. And this quote from him states, "The results of these studies are remarkably consistent. Property values in local historic districts appreciate significantly faster than the market as a whole in the vast majority of cases, and appreciate at rates equivalent to the market in the worst case. Simply put, historic districts enhance property value. So when you preserve a historic building, you are preserving land. When you rehabilitate a historic building, you are reducing waste generation. When you reuse a historic building, you are increasing recycling. In fact, historic preservation is the ultimate in recycling." And also, I hear a lot of people talking about non-contributing, so they own the property within one of the historic districts that seems to be non-contributing. In other words, it's not old enough to be a contributing property within those areas. And I believe, if I'm correct on this, that they have to abide by a very lighter kind of set of rules with a certificate of appropriateness than ones that are truly what is called contributing. And Fazio may, Dr. Fazio may can confirm that. I'm not sure, but not the same standards. So a concrete building that's built in 1990 will not have the same set of standards in an 1888 house.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon.
I just had a question. Is it, so if you don't vote on the 18th, will it have to be voted on the next one, or it dies, or how does that work? And secondly, if
is there a way to still take people out at this point? Or now that we're here, you've got to go through the whole thing again and start over? Can the areas still be excluded?
No, the board is the governing body, and this would be an ordinance of the board. So the board has discretion to act in any manner from a policy standpoint that they judge to be the best course. Now, generally speaking, there is no window that the board has to act on this. However, with this 6-month window, I don't know if it has some special requirements. Does it just lapse at the end of the 6-month period if no action has been taken? Is there a requirement that some determination be made before the 6-month period is up, Mr. Tony?
I'm looking at the 60-day rule, actually, under state statute. It says the decision, the local governing authority must take action on the proposed designation within 60 days of the public hearing.
Okay. So action would have to be taken within 60 days of the first public hearing or the second public hearing?
I will look into that, but I would suspect that a public hearing is a public hearing, and so the board would have 60 days after the last public hearing. But I'll confirm that.
So if y'all didn't vote on the 18th, they would have to vote on it in the July session?
Within a 60-day window. What I can't confirm right now is whether that's 60 days from this public hearing or 60 days from the June 18th public hearing.
And y'all can still take areas out as the board sees fit, not anything based on
The board could.
historical district's recommendations?
Yes.
How would you make that request?
You can submit it in a variety of ways. Submit in writing either to me or Ms. Spruill, and we'll keep a compilation for the board. You can submit to the board, and we will see to it that it is circulated as those requests come in. All right, that's going to conclude our public comment portion of the public hearing. We will now hear any concluding comments from the members of the board. Alderman Sistrom.
I wanted to say that I think to that last question, probably the cleanest process is to submit it to the mayor or chief administrative officer. That way we've just got one touch point and there's less chance that something goes wrong. So I would say submit it to those two offices. And to an earlier question about how can you learn more, I would say that Dr. Fazio probably would, and his committee would be more than happy to answer questions. And Ms. Jones also offered tonight to help with questions. And I would encourage people to use those resources.
Further concluding comments from the members of the board? No. Time for public comments expired. Alderman Carter.
First of all, remember, we're talking about 100-year-old homes here, so this is not a time-sensitive issue. Probably the only time-sensitive issue we're dealing with tonight is a lady that can't renovate her house, and the people in here that want to do, I mean, rain's out, it's summertime, I've got things at the house, everybody's got things at the house you're ready to do, and keep up the good and positive work you've been doing. That's the only time-sensitive thing. This 6-month issue we're dealing with needs to be taken off the books however we can. The biggest mistruth we've heard tonight is that we've got to vote on that. We don't have to vote on this right now. I think obviously there's a lot of questions. As this goes on and on, I've got more and more questions. I'm writing them down just for the next time we meet, but I think we need to step back and get the opinions of everybody involved. I mean, it's been a small group of less than 10 people who are affecting the property values and property rights of hundreds of people. This district right here, I don't even think it needs to be included. There, Washington Street possibly could be in the discussion. Places around Overstreet, but a lot of these are rental properties. A lot of these right here, vinyl sided, modern duplexes. We've heard all these things that aren't even historical in nature. This is definitely an encroachment on the rights of the property owner. If I own in this district right here is a rental property, I don't even think it needs to be included. Some of the realtors are here, and it's sitting there, and I think everybody knows when you buy a house, the most drastic changes you probably make on a house are right after you buy it and right before you sell it. So if you are coming into Starkville, you're going to move here, and this is a retirement home, and you want to be in an older home, or historic-looking home, or historical home, and then after that purchase to be told, hopefully somebody told you, but in case it didn't, after that purchase, you're told that you can't even change the things you wanted to change and make the updates you wanted to make, until you went through this process and through this chart and graph that we saw. I think that would kind of be a slap in the face, because if I bought a place and you're going to tell me I can't do anything to it until I got somebody else's approval that I didn't know, so that, how it's going to be. You're going to go to City Hall. One thing we haven't spoken about is this coming through the Community Development Director, and he's new, and we're in the process of getting him some help, but, you know, we keep tacking things on and on to him, and every renovation we got, you're gonna have to go see him. He's already a busy man. It's probably gonna be an additional staffing requirement made in that department. You know, again, back to this is not a time-sensitive issue. Don't let that lie be told. This is something we need to sit back, meet as a community. If y'all wanna have it at the sportsplex, some kind of, not a public hearing, let's take that word out, just make it a concerned citizen meeting or a town hall meeting. I'll be in attendance. I think this is something that we're gonna have to hash out, figure out the areas that don't even apply in these districts. Some will, some won't. Figure out if there's a public consensus. If you wanna be included, be included. If you don't, don't. You know, that's an option. If you don't want your house included, you know, obviously, nobody else has the right to tell you that you have to be included in it. If you want to, that's fine. So anyway, we don't have to vote on this on the next meeting, or in mid-June. As a matter of fact, I think it'd kind of be a slap in y'all's face to do it. I think that we need to just sit and wait and have some kind of meeting where you can come, get your thoughts prepared, go look at this, study it. If it is on the website, yeah, study it in its entirety, print it out. It's 100 and something pages, get you some extra ink, come back with it, and have your question prepared, because these guys have done good work. I just think that they need to have everybody's opinion and figure out the right way to make it fit, because it's obviously not the right way right now. So, thank you.
Alderman Vaughn.
Mr. City Attorney, so in other words, Ms. Liz Collier just on hold to somebody.
She currently is, as it stands now.
Any further concluding comments from the members of the board?
It's no other alternative, no other solution that,
The board can always grant an exemption if it wanted to.
And we were talking about the house on Jackson Street that
Right,
caught on fire.
right.
I think it is urgent and necessitous at some immediate time that we grant her relief. This was something that was beyond her control. I don't think that she needs to be penalized as a property owner for a fire that occurred, you know, beyond her means. So I certainly am going to step up to the table here and respectfully request that we grant her at least some immediate relief so that she can get her house back in the condition that she desires for it to be in as a property owner. I think we as a governing body should give due consideration and due respect to that property owner so she can put her house in whatever condition as a property owner that she desires. So I am going to ask that this matter be placed on our next agenda, whether it's a special call meeting or the regular next meeting on June 4th, for her to have some consideration. And of course, Ms. Brewer, you getting the message as to what my request is. I want her to be able to proceed with doing what action may be necessary and proper for her house to be restored, and she should not be penalized from having any start point as to a proposed ordinance that may be considered by a board of aldermen, whether it is the current board or the future board. So I think we owe that to her. I mean, that's just great respect, and I certainly feel that is the proper thing to do. So, Ms. Brewer, if you would have this an agenda item, and if you would notify the property owner as to when we're going to consider it, and I like the proper motion to be whatever it is that we need to do for her as a property owner to be able to proceed without any restrictions or any impediment of any kind, type, manner whatsoever from this city of Starkville, Mississippi, so she can get her house in whatever shape or posture that she wants it in. So that's my request for the next agenda, whether it's a special call meeting before June the 4th or at our next meeting on June the 4th. So that's my request. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any further concluding comments from members of the board?
I got a question. What is that 6 months? Where is that coming from? I thought that when we made an ordinance, it was enacted 30 days post the enacting date. What is the 6 months we're discussing?
Where does the 6 months come from?
I'll defer to Dr. Fazio on that. That is in the Historic Preservation Commission ordinance for a waiting period? Where's the, I'm unclear on that as well.
This is the first I've heard.
Allow me.
Maintain decorum.
It has nothing to do
Maintain
with
decorum.
the standards that I brought in
Ms. Rule, why don't you field that one?
In the ordinance, there is a section that says that once it's designated by the commission, which the Historic Preservation Commission did so on February the 26th, I believe it was, that the districts will be treated as though they are in existence
So where's the 6 months come in?
for 6 months, for that period of
Okay.
time, for the 6 months.
So
And
it
that's-
is in the enabling ordinance.
Yes.
It is the answer to the question.
Do we have any documentation of that up here, or is that just something?
Well, I can hopefully pull it up.
We'll
Mr. Snow, do you
recess
have
in a
the
minute.
ordinance?
All right, are there any further concluding comments from the members of the board? Are there any further concluding, Alderman Corey?
Dr. Fazio, does the Historic Preservation Commission plan to have its next regular meeting next Tuesday?
No.
You're not?
Yes.
No, we
Which
have
is
no
it?
scheduled meetings at this time because we've been waiting to see what action the board.
Would you be willing to entertain a meeting for the purpose of citizen feedback?
Well, we certainly, I mean, we'll do anything that would be useful.
Are there any further concluding comments from the members of the board?
I just want to address that before we leave. We got people that are trying to, I mean, this is real world trying to renovate that. Is that something we can make a motion on tonight to strike that? from
You
that
can make a
ordinance?
motion right now to exempt that property.
And if I can get it in writing, I'd like to make that motion.
All right, a motion, what was your address, ma'am, Ms. Collier? 511 South Jackson. The motion from Alderman Carver is to exempt.
No, I want to see it in writing, and I want to exempt that from the ordinance. Is that okay? The 6 month we're discussing all night.
We haven't actually adopted the ordinance.
Can't exempt just a section of it? Or does it have to?
You could exempt it from the mandate that it's under right now.
I'm just trying to help and alleviate that.
Sure, and I was gonna give it a shot, but would you like to make the motion, or?
If I can see it in writing.
Okay. He wants to, can you read the section that places the 6 month requirement?
I'm in search. It is under 67-31. C, a resource or resources may be nominated for designation upon motion of 3 members of the commission or by an owner of the property. The nomination shall contain information as specified by the commission. The commission must reach a decision on whether to recommend a proposed nomination to the city within 6 months in the case of a historic district and 2 months in the case of either a landmark or landmark site. If the commission, I'm sorry, I saw 6 months, I went for it. Okay, after the nomination of a resource to the city for possible local designation, this is F. The resource shall be fully protected by the provisions of this article for a period of 6 months as if it were already designated.
Can you write that up a motion that would pertain to that, the city attorney?
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, it's a quick and easy fix if you want to. You could just move to strike that provision from the ordinance, which would be move approval to strike 67-31F.
That's gonna be an ordinance.
But I mean, to exempt it on the fly today for this particular piece of property.
Yeah, I was.
So we've got to decide what we're doing. Are we giving an exemption for this particular property? Or do we want to try to do something as a proposal to this enabling legislation to carry it forward? If we're doing that, you have to go through the ordinance amendment process. If you want to provide the homeowner relief tonight, it's just a motion as Alderman Perkins was contemplating down there, to provide specific relief to the homeowner, to allow her to build back. There is some precedent for this. My recollection is we did this for the apartment complex that burned down near the hospital. That wasn't a historic preservation issue, but that was a building codes and planning issue. And we allowed that apartment complex to build back as it was. And this board made that exemption from the table.
That's not altering an ordinance. It's addressing a specific
Right.
situation that's urgent and pressing.
So there's no way I could just scratch that whole section right now? We'd have to go back through the ordinance process?
Correct.
And public hearing?
Just from our internal procedures process.
Okay, just checking.
Hold on, let's see. Alderman Carver, do you have a motion?
If you don't have a motion.
You gonna defer to Alderman Perkins?
Make that motion.
Alderman Perkins.
Mr. Attorney, will you reduce that to writing as you've been requested?
Sure.
So we
You had
can-
contemplated a break. Can we take a break and I'll scratch it out during the break and then we'll come back? and-
Without objection, I'm gonna move us into a brief recess. Is there any,
Let's take this and then let's move into recess after.
All right.
So these, everybody. can
scratch it out?
Okay.
Let's-
Get this, let's close this. Yeah.
It's 511 Jackson Street.
Thank you.
We're not gonna recess.
Get something to live, just let know before people come up together.
You have her approval document.
Hopefully they don't run into one of
Find it and make her a copy.
Can I send you a copy on PowerPoint?
Email address is on the website, so.
Okay, so that's your Alderman Award
This is
5.
my supper, so.
Dude.
Times are hard.
I've given up red meat recently. For me, that is amazing.
That's right. That's right. He will replace Dumas. Dumas did not run again.
I've talked to residents there.
Awesome job. I'm with you always.
The way you would talk to him now, he just, yeah, he just won't have card. Yeah, he was on a
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, it did good.
The exact number,
Yeah,
but I was sure for that part of it, 'cause that's in my ward.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. I should. You should. I'm with you. Yes, sir.
Sure.
Yes, sir. We appreciate you coming. Thank you so much. Yes, sir. Yes,
I
sir.
guess the best resource, totally unbiased view, is the ordinance documents themselves and the standards. I mean, the people that understand it the best are the commission. You are correct. They definitely have a position on it.
Dr. Rose, keep developing. We think we're going to keep you in town. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sure, they're going to by far be the best on the technical questions.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
No. What happened is you've got an enabling ordinance that allows the historic preservation commission and then they are empowered to create certain districts, but they're not empowered to create those. They're empowered to recommend those districts to the board. Ultimate action has to be made by the board. No. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah, I got it.
You ready?
I'll just read it. Ms. Collier, your first name, Vivian? Liz, excuse me.
Thank you.
All right, the city attorney's got us a motion ready.
Got us a motion?
The proposed motion would be move that the homeowner, Ms. Liz Collier, located at 511 South Jackson Street, be allowed to build back her home to the former condition before the fire and expressly be exempt from the requirements of Starkville Ordinance 67-31F.
Alderman Perkins, is that your motion?
I move approval, Mr. Mayor.
All right, and the motion has been reduced to writing, so without objection, I will not reread it. Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none. Alderman Perkins, you wish to speak on the merits?
No, sir.
Alderman Vaughn.
Ms. Liz, did you hear the motion? Yes, sir. You okay with that? I second.
All right, motion is, I didn't get a second. You're right. Motion has been seconded by Alderman Vaughn. At this time, is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. And at this time, I'm going to conclude the public hearing. Without objection, I'm going to take us into brief recess.
Thank you, board members.
Any objection, seeing none, stand in recess.
Again, thank you for recognizing the importance of this subject and generating this kind of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Melby. Is there now anyone wishing to speak against the proposed Nash Street ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak against? Is there anyone wishing to speak against the proposed ordinance? Seeing no one, is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance?
Hi, my name is Virginia Hamilton. I'm a resident on Nash Street. I'm in a unique situation. I've lived in two other historic neighborhoods briefly before, which do have some form of committee and oversight towards preservation. And for me, it was only helpful. I was a first-time homeowner, and they not only helped me get some of the architectural details down, they also helped me get a grant to get the front facade fixed. And my neighbors would say the same. In general, these committees only look to do positive things and help the neighbors. They're not knocking on your doors complaining about this or that. It's just something to help the preservation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Nash Street ordinance? Anyone wishing to speak against? All right, is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance? Anyone now wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak for, against, or indifferent to the proposed Nash Street ordinance? Is there anyone wishing to speak? Anyone wishing to speak? Seeing no one. Yes, sir.
I'm Joe Buckner again. I was born and raised in Starkville, and I don't own a home there, but I think the two previous testimonies prove that there's no need for a historical district. They're taking care of it themselves. Why do you need to establish a historical district if they're already taking care of their neighborhood? And to me, that's what it's all about. And I would ask the board, why don't we look at the poorer neighborhoods and try to help them out and spend your time trying to help those neighborhoods be right rather than spend them on historical districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buckner. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the Nash Street ordinance?
Good evening to everyone. Name Abington. We need to try and keep peace. We hear tragedy everywhere else. If we don't start thinking, we can bring tragedy on ourselves. We need jobs, industry. It's sad that Columbus and West Point is beating us down on people coming to their city. We being left out. You can be too restricted, and you can drive jobs away, and then eventually you can drive people away because they feel like that, I don't want to live there.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Yes, sir.
John Hamilton, 108 North Nash Street. First off, I'd like to thank Dr. Fazio and all the people that put the efforts into putting this together. I feel that, as stated earlier, that we have no subdivision codes or anything. This would help preserve what we now have. And in our neighborhood, we've experienced that if you don't have some protection, other things can happen. So essentially all I'm saying, I'm in favor of it.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton.
I'm still Tom Carskadden. I can't help but notice that there seems to be a very strong consensus on Nash Street, where there wasn't in the previous discussion. And maybe that should be a deciding factor, whether there's really strong consensus or whether there's a lot of feeling on both sides, in which case, do no harm.
Thank you, Dr. Carskadden. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the Nash Street ordinance? Anyone else wishing to speak? Anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing no one, that will include, oh, yes, sir.
I'm Robert Buckner, and I've been a resident in Starkville since 1968. And I'm not currently a property owner on Nash Street, but as a little boy, I grew up just on the back street of Nash Street on Herbert Street. I used to ride my bike up and down the streets, play and walk and run. And I'm opposed to the historic district. I'm happy with you calling it historic, but I'm opposed to legislation telling us how to keep our houses. And so, even if it were to pass for Nash Street, then that would deter me from wanting to ever buy property on Nash Street in the future. So I'm opposed to that.
Thank you, Mr. Buckner. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on Nash Street? Anyone else wishing to speak? Anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing no one, that will conclude this, the first public hearing on the proposed Nash Street historic ordinance. Well, I'm sorry, we'll hear any concluding comments by the members of the board.
I've got one question for Dr. Fazio. Just to speak in terms of examples here, knowing that a great historic home was purchased and torn down on Nash Street to then be turned into a parking lot, would that have been accomplished had these regulations been in place for Nash Street at the time?
I can only say that it would have been necessary to get a demolition permit from us
Okay.
in order to demolish.
Are there any further questions or comments from the members of the board? Alderman Corey.
Pete, are you aware of any current residents on Nash Street that are opposed to this?
No, we have regular historic, regular neighborhood association meetings. No one has voiced any opposition to it. That they're really up with the spirit of unity, of preserving and enhancing the neighborhood. And I think that's one thing these districts do, is they create an opportunity for unity.
Are there any further concluding comments from the members of the board? Any further concluding comments?
I would just like to, I guess, agree with you in saying that this is probably one of those examples, if you'd look and see that, listen to the opinions of the residents, this might be one that you could come out with some kind of historic preservation district. I think the situation is going to be different from Nash with any others as far as the encroachment they've got from more modern type developments around where they might want to preserve that district in that area. But totally separate from Greensboro Street in the way that it's laid out, so, thank you.
Any further concluding comments from the members of the board? Any further concluding comments? Seeing none, that will conclude this, the first public hearing on the proposed Nash.
8474.
Meeting will now come back to order. And the next matter on the agenda is a report from Randy Scrivener on the 2012 audit. Mr. Scrivener?
Mayor, can we recognize?
You may.
Can I move that we table this matter?
Okay, motion has been made by Alderman Carver to table the report of the audit. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Vaughn. Alderman Carver, I'm sorry, there's no discussion. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. All those opposed, please signify by raising your hand.
To table the presentation.
I'm going to abstain.
All right. If you abstain, it would count with the majority, so it would be a table. Is that your intent? All right, let me start that over. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. All those opposed to the motion to table, please signify by raising your hand. All right, vote is 3-3, and I will vote against the motion to table, so the motion does not carry. We will hear the audit report from Mr. Scrivener.
Mr. Mayor, if I be recognized.
You may.
Mr. Scrivener, I've gotten your report, and I mean, it's been a lot of talking, a lot in the newspaper. What is it that you want us to know that's not in your report? What is it you're here to tell us?
There's absolutely nothing other than to ask any questions that the board may have that's not covered in the audit report. The reason I'm here tonight is it's part of our obligation under our engagement contract to present this to the Board of Aldermen at a meeting of your choosing.
You know, I mean, we appreciate your service, you know, and I've gotten this report. I'm very familiar with it. Is there anything particular that I need to hear from you other than you're reading that back to me again?
No, sir. You had a good year. You had unqualified opinions. There are some significant deficiencies in the internal control report, none of which we deem to be material weaknesses on the part of the city. And outside of that, it was a pretty standard audit report. Great assistance in a very unusual audit year from Taylor and his staff at City Hall, with the computer conversion and pulling all the records together. We saw increased internal controls, as was evidenced by the fact that the city's internal controls discovered a misappropriation of funds. But outside of that, it was a very standard audit. You did see an increase in fund balance for the year. I don't have that amount. I haven't been able to work with the city clerk to determine the exact amount that can be reprogrammed into fund balance yet, but it will be an increase that can be reprogrammed.
And no laws were broken from your expert opinion as an auditor for the city?
You had no state law violations. You had no compliance violations.
Mayor?
Alderman Sistrunk.
I do have some questions, Mr. Scrivener, and they're pretty simple. I think everybody has read the stories in the paper, and if you could, without getting too bogged down in the weeds, could you explain to us why there is, or maybe stepping back, could you explain the difference between the Parks Commission audit and the city's audit? Because those are two separate entities.
They're two separate audits. The Park Commission has a separate board, and so therefore it is required to have a separate audit. It handles its own, part of its own funding and makes its own decisions, and so they engage us as auditors. However, since the City of Starkville Board of Aldermen controls the composition of the Park Commission audit, it is considered a component unit of the City of Starkville. You maintain fiduciary rights of the 2% money. And so as it relates to the 2% money, that comes back into the City of Starkville's audits, as well as the income and expense and assets and liabilities of the Park Commission. Since it is the City of Starkville's fiduciary responsibility, that is rolled back into your audit. Although they have a separate board and a separate audit, and they have separate management decisions made by the Park Commission.
Can you talk to us about the Parks audit until it's been presented to us?
I am somewhat limited in what I can discuss with the Parks Department, because it has not been presented on behalf of the Parks Department to the City of Starkville.
Right.
That report is, I assume, part of public record now and has been presented to the Parks Commission. They did accept it that day. We did run into some issues related to the splash pad that did impact the City of Starkville. Simply related, and it bridged 2 fiscal years. And the City of Starkville handled its appropriations properly because it cut off funding when the budget was reached at the 2% money. And there was apparent miscommunications between the two entities as far as what 2% monies that the park was thinking it was paid out of and the city, and it resulted in an internal control deficiency in both entities. Significant deficiency, not a material weakness on the city, but because of the dollar amount to the park, it is a material weakness on the Parks Department.
Mr. Mayor, may I recognize one question?
No, Alderman Sistrunk has the floor.
So where you have said tonight that the city has implemented internal controls that have helped us determine some problems at an infancy and be able to handle those, you can't necessarily make that same statement about the Parks Commission?
I cannot make that same statement about the Parks Commission. I can make that statement about the embezzlement was uncovered extremely quickly, and it was quite impressive that the controls of the computer system caught that at the time that it did, and limited to what it was. The situation with the communications between the Park Commission and the City Board needs some work in that area to this is the first time the Park Commission has taken on a project of this size since it's was on its own financial control. And that's when you usually see situations like this happen, you know, to where you see the deficiencies in internal control is when you have something for the first time. And that's what happened here. You've got a budget that is funding between two sources. And it wasn't, in our opinion, it wasn't enough communication or enough controls there to properly monitor that budget.
And one of the things that this particular board has done with the city is we've really made an emphasis on internal controls. I would think that the parks should be doing that as well based on the audit findings. They should be reviewing their internal controls and developing processes to shore up those deficiencies and weaknesses that you found in this audit.
Yes, ma'am, that was our recommendation to the Park Commission.
Do you know the status of that?
I do not know the status of that.
All right. And just from a procedural perspective, in your opinion, is it possible for the city's internal controls ever to be strong enough to cover what might happen at the Parks Commission? Is my question somewhat clear?
Well, it is always quite difficult when you have an autonomous board making spending decisions unless you're going to implement a review of those spending decisions. It's just about the only control that I can see right now off the cuff that would be strong enough. You would have to review, have someone in place to review those spending decisions to make sure that they're staying within those budgets of 2% monies.
I have some additional comments later, but.
All right, then I've got Alderman Perkins and Alderman Carver would be after Alderman Perkins. Alderman Perkins.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. Mr. Accountant, based upon your involvement with the city audit and your understanding of how the Park Commission works, isn't it correct that the Park Commission is a body that is totally separate and autonomous from the city, and that the commission has total control over all property matters and affairs as relating to the Park Commission? Isn't it correct that the Park Commission has total control of all matters and affairs per state law?
That is my interpretation of where we are with that. That is correct.
Right, and so is it your further understanding, Mr. Accountant, that in light of that response, then only the Park Commission under state law has the authority, in light of the fact that they have control of all matters and property and things related to the Park Commission, to take whatever action, if any, that they may deem necessary?
I'm going to have to defer that to legal counsel because that's getting a little outside of my expertise. But the funding decisions and the appropriateness of the funding decisions as it relates to internal driven funds, solicited donated funds, and the appropriation from the City Hall, without question, that spending authority lies with the Park Commission.
Okay, the spending authority lies with the Park Commission. Mr. Attorney, my final question for right now is based on your knowledge of state law and applicable law, that the Park Commission has total and absolute authority and control over all matters and property and affairs and things regarding the Park Commission.
That's my understanding as the way things are set up now when you look at it under state law.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney.
Actually, that raises an interesting point because we've got a finding in our audit that says that the city needs to develop better internal controls with respect to park capital projects and budgeting, but
as it relates to the 2% money.
Okay.
And that's because you control the spending of the 2% money.
Okay.
That flows through your disbursement system upon approval by the Park Commission, but it still flows through your disbursement system. And if you'll read that finding, it refers strictly to the 2% monies.
Now, Mr. Mayor, if I may ask one final question. Now, with regard to the 2% monies, now, under the legislation, 40% of that 2% money goes to to the park commission. But the point I want to make, and I think you agree with me, Mr. Cannon, that whatever money that park commission has and how it is handled, that is under their total control per the state law. And the city attorney has answered in affirmative. You're not disagreeing with that, right?
No, that's the reason the other findings in the Park Commission did not come over to your audit report.
Right.
And it was a different finding in your audit report related to what was in the Park Commission's audit report, because you had a budget that you approved, even though it expanded 2 fiscal years, the 2% portion of that money exceeded that internal budget of the Park Commission that they submitted to you for inclusion in your records.
And finally,
That is strictly related to the 2%.
Right, and finally, Mr. Cannon, then with those answers, then in light of the fact the Park Commission then has that authority, then isn't it also correct that the Park Commission has that authority to take whatever action that they may deem necessary, if any, to control the mechanism of the monies that are within their jurisdiction?
Yes, I would say that's correct.
Thank you.
So to summarize, the Parks Commission has some internal control responsibilities with respect to their own findings, but the city has a recommendation for internal controls with respect to 2% funds expended by the Parks Commission.
And Mr. Mayor, I mean, if there's an issue with the 2% money, since it's under your care, to me, it would even follow a bid violation or something like that if that's related to the 2% money. I don't see how you split that difference, even though you have an autonomous board making decisions with it as it relates to the 2%. As long as that's controlled by you, you've got that fiduciary responsibility. And you've got to maintain that because you still have debt service, and that's the reason you're maintaining control of that 2% money. But that's the reason that finding, even though it's weakened from the Park Commission, carried over to your audit report, is because of, that 2% budget was exceeded.
All right, I've got Alderman Carver next, then Alderman Dumas, then Alderman Corey. Alderman Carver. Alderman Dumas.
All right, so let's use real world examples here, and I know everybody's kind of dancing around the big elephant in the room here. All right, we have a situation here where we have a Parks Commission who wrote an unauthorized check, then gave the city an invoice for the full amount. That amount being $118,000, I'm assuming, or somewhere in that neighborhood. 2% money. So the invoice that was submitted to the city was for a full amount, not taking into account the $35,000 that was from an external fund that we have nothing to do with. So the next board meeting, 6-7 days later, we submitted full payment or approved full payment of that invoice. So how could we, the city, because I appreciate your comment on the policy and procedure on your fourth finding there, how could we stop that so that from an internal control standpoint, we know those things or what type of policy or procedure could be put in place that could help us from that standpoint?
Wow. I don't know of one that could have stopped that scenario. Again, without that situation would not have been prevented. You circumvented internal controls.
Well,
with that decision, and when you circumvent controls, you can't. Then you've got controls.
Mm-hmm.
When you say that this has got to happen, this approval's got to happen, and when controls are circumvented, there's no controls that you can put in place to prevent circumvention of controls. And there's nothing that you could have done to have avoided that.
And I guess
from the city standpoint.
Well, and maybe this is from the autonomy and the way the city and the Parks and Rec Commission are linked. I mean, I've served on the CVB board. We submit our budget every year. I know there's been ample conversation on this board prior to my getting on this board with Student Affairs about the full and total review of their budget. And I guess that's where I'm being confused, because we the city, for instance, with CVB or with OCEDA or with Student Affairs, we don't have that type of control from an audit standpoint that we have and I guess the autonomy situation is what gives us that type of oversight at the end of the day with the Parks Commission.
And somebody can refresh my memory that's been on this longer than I have, but at one point in time, you still paid the bills out of the 2% money and approved the expenditures, even after the transfer to the autonomous board.
All right, well, that's a good question on Bill, because I've got two other things here, and this may be audit, maybe not. I've got copies of Starkville Electric Department receipts here, and then, again, this may not be 2%, but just in the billing cycle from 11/27 to 12/16, Parks and Rec was shown past due at a total of $41,500 just on electric bills. So is that a control that we need to implement on Starkville Electric's side so that we can, or is that something that the city can be involved with? Because I also have, I have 75 invoices that are over 45 days old that break state statute of 45-day invoice payment. That's well over $24,000 in invoices that were submitted to the city on record. So I'm wondering from a parks perspective, I mean, this seems systematic of bigger issues. How do we control these internally from our standpoint so that these types of things, because this individual was going out against the city when in fact it was nothing with the city of Starkville, it was the Parks Commission. And we have an electric department that may not be 2%, but it's directly involved, because I'm guessing when most people get to that point of past due payment, I've got 3 bill cycles for a total of $58,000 past due. They'd cut my lights off. They'd cut everybody else's lights off. So how do we ensure that this stuff doesn't continue to happen? Is that an internal control from an audit standpoint? Or from an accounting standpoint?
You can't, when it's not involving the 2% money, I don't see how you can impose controls on the Park Commission that's going to resolve those problems. There's no control that I can think of, and again, you're asking me questions on the fly, we're with some pretty complex answers here, but I can't think of a control that you can impose on an autonomous board to pay their bills on time. I mean, I just don't see that. Now, you can do something with their, 2% with the 2% money, because you're involved in that. You can certainly monitor budgets. You can require more detailed monthly reports and raise questions. But I don't know that you can impose your will on anything based on what the attorney said with an autonomous board. I just can't think of a control that would work in that situation. Now, the 2% money, you can take it back over and resolve that.
And which, other than the park improvement budget, which is, what's the latest total on parks improvement budget? What's their fund balance now? Which that's a 2% item?
As of this afternoon, it's $12.35.
$12? How, in total line item or what?
$180,000 provided.
So, now they get much more than that in terms of 2% money. The other 2% money goes to debt service, is that correct, on the sportsplex?
But you still pay the debt service from City Hall.
I have no further questions.
Alderman Corey.
Well, obviously this has become somewhat of a political issue, and Jeremiah kind of touched on some of that. But how many years have you been doing the audit for the city of Starkville?
City of Starkville has been 20 years, 19 years.
And when do you normally present the audit to the city?
The audit is normally presented right after the 1st of April. It's usually that 2-week period. We have always tried to target the 2nd week of March. The reason, and I will go ahead and get that political issue out of the room right now. The reason this audit was delayed was you had an embezzlement that we had to work with the State Department of Audit on. You had a new computer software system that we're dealing with auditing and EDP testing and still trying to reconcile reports from an old format to a new format. You had attempted throughout the year to use this new computer system for your fixed assets. You had a new city clerk, And we got the final information through everything the latter part of April. And I worked staff 24 hours a day for 3 days to get this report ready now instead of 2 weeks from now. But you had we got in and got to auditing and got in, and then, like I said, you have an embezzlement pop up the 1st of February, was it, end of January, that postponed us for 30 days while you're working with that, and it consumed the resources of your city clerk's office.
Embezzlement in which department?
In the city clerk's office.
Thank you.
But again, as far as the timing of this was the first available date that my staff and your staff could get this audit report to the public.
Mayor? Who contacted, did you contact the city staff, or they contacted you about today's meeting?
About what?
Today's meeting, who contacted who?
The date of the meeting?
Today's meeting, did you contact somebody here? Did somebody from the?
Actually, I was scheduled to be on the agenda for May the 7th, Lynn, and I think I contacted Lynn on May the 5th and said I can't make it for that meeting. And she said that we could, to move it to the next meeting. And I think I emailed you Monday or last Monday and said I've got to have this piece of information to make it because Taylor was involved in an election and had not had a chance to complete the management discussion and analysis. And he worked apparently a good portion of the night and got that to me. And we were able to get this in time for this meeting. But I can specifically say I was not asked to delay the audit or to postpone this for any reason. This is the first available date I could have gotten here. And we have been here later than this before.
So from now on, we can expect your audit findings a month earlier, at least?
I would hope 2 months earlier.
Okay.
I mean, again, our intentions were February, and we were on track for February.
And
The Sistrum can attest to that. I mean, we were on track for that until we ran into the embezzlement issue. The park issue didn't delay anything. I mean, that was not an issue that delayed your report.
Alderman Vaughn.
What is the time limit, do the 2% funds be dispersed to park and recreation? Do we do it all at the same time, every quarter, whenever we're doing? Is it on a time schedule?
No, it's not dispersed like the general appropriation from the city is dispersed. And you may can speak to this better than I can, but the vast majority of the 2% revenue to parks services general obligation debt that the city actually holds. And the city makes those payments directly. And then there is a $180,000 parks improvement line that comes from the city, and those are dispersed when a request is made.
That's right.
Is that correct?
Alderman, what they'll do is the Park Commission approves in their minutes that invoice, as part of their claim docket, that invoice ABCD 123 is to be paid out of 2% money, and then that is sent over with the, and I wish Taylor was here to answer this, I think it's sent over with a transmittal form, and it's handled through, at that point it goes through the city's accounts payable process. That's what makes the city responsible for those payments, because you're not following up. When I say you don't have the controls, you're not following up with making sure that the document is documented over on the Parks Commission. You're writing the checks. You're trusting them to do that, but you don't have the controls in place to make certain that everything is taken care of over on that side. That's the reason that finding duplicates over on the city side.
Was there any embezzlement found in park and recs?
Pardon?
Was there any embezzlement found in park and recs?
Was there any embezzlement? No. There was no misappropriation of funds in Parks and Recs.
Alderman Sistrum.
I'm gonna try to get us off off of this, and if you don't mind, I'm gonna run through the findings. The first one dealt with reconciling some ledgers monthly. Our new software should allow us
And
to
that's-
handle that, and that should be
There's-
good going forward.
There's $80,000 of old stuff that we've gotten reconciled, and that will be taken care of.
All right, so that finding should
Would-
go
would
away.
go away, yes, ma'am.
All right, the next one has to do with preparation of the statements themselves, and
That
that's a
one
pretty
actually
typical.
goes away under new government auditing standards this year.
Okay, all right. Then we have the embezzlement issue that occurred here in City Hall, and that was found quickly because of internal control issues. Which leaves us with the finding about the parks and how the two entities work together, and how you control spending in two areas. I'm gonna ask you one question that we've not asked about that, and you found a weakness in the spending of the 2% money. Is it reasonable to expect that if you have a weakness in one area, you might also have those same internal control weaknesses in other areas? It just didn't rise to the dollar value that the 2% money.
Are you referring to your
No, no,
city
to the
audit?
parks audit, to the parks audit. And I know
There-
we've not been
there
presented.
are, again, the audit report is part of public record out there, but there were multiple findings related to budgeting and other things that are related to similar to the
Okay.
to the budgeting issues.
Okay.
That covers part of the utility bills.
All right.
And again, I do think, and that has been identified, and I know Mr. Peters and I've had conversations about that and it was a big discussion at the Park Commission on why that occurs. But yes, ma'am, it's kind of, you and I've had this discussion. You get one finding that's not necessarily rises everything to a material weakness, but then you get a pattern of them, and it can pull even the simplest of findings up to material weaknesses when you get into multiple type findings.
So I would see our job tonight, one, to accept your audit, and two, to make some decision about a path forward with the things that we can't control, which would relate to the Parks Commission. And what I'm hearing tonight is that we need a bit more information to make an informed decision about that. So I would, do you want me to make a motion?
Yes.
And I'd like to make two. First, I'd like to move that
Let's
we.
take them one at a time.
I would like to. First, I would like to move that we accept the audit report as presented.
Alderman Sistrunk has made a motion to accept the audit report as presented. Alderman Sistrunk, is that your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Dumas. Alderman Sistrunk, do you wish to speak on the merits?
No.
Any discussion, any discussion, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
No.
All right, I've got 5 in favor and 1 against. Was there anyone other than Carver against? All right,
That's to accept the audit report as presented.
that's right. All right, let's do it by show of hands for clarity. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. All those opposed, please signify by raising your hand. All right, there are 3 in favor and 3 against. I will break the tie voting yea, so the motion to accept the audit as presented passes. Alderman Sistrunk, you have the floor.
And then I would like to move that the city clerk be tasked with requesting a copy of the parks audit to be presented to the board, with making a projection for park performance through year end, in documenting or in presenting a review of any past due or any invoices not paid within the 45-day statute, and providing a status on internal controls.
Have you reduced that to writing?
I have not.
All right, let's go through it again, because I didn't write. All right.
I move that that we task the city clerk with requesting a copy of the parks audit to be presented to the Board of Aldermen, with making a financial analysis projection for this fiscal year for the parks, to present a list of invoices that fall outside that were paid outside the 45-day statute. To provide a status on the park's internal controls review. And provide any other such information as the board should consider in determining how to manage the parks going forward.
That last part. Any other information the board should consider in determining?
How to manage the parks going forward.
No later than the June 4 board meeting. And that's a fairly, well, I'll wait till my comment period.
All right, the motion by Alderman Sistrunk is to task the city clerk with requesting the parks audit to be presented to the board, making a financial projection for the fiscal year, present a list of invoices paid by the Parks Commission outside of the 45-day statute, provide the status of the parks internal controls related to their audit.
Just internal control.
Provide a status of the parks internal controls and any other information the board should consider in determining how to manage the parks going forward. The report is to be provided no later than June 4th, 2013, or than the June 4th, 2013 board meeting. Alderman Sistrunk, is that your motion?
I think that sounds.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Dumas. Alderman Sistrunk, do you wish to speak on the merits?
I would say that that's a pretty tight turnaround, but I think that this has been hashed out in the press and that we've talked about it internally. You've probably talked with the parks and the city clerk's office, so I don't think it's I think it's a doable time frame for providing us some information.
Any discussion? Alderman Perkins.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for the recognition. I strongly oppose this motion. It is my personal opinion that this motion is purely political motivated. I question the timing of this audit report. This audit report comes on the eve of an election. It is my personal opinion that this motion and this report is designed, in my opinion, to hopefully bring about some desired results for the June 4th, 2013 election that's going to come up. Now, there has been a lot of emphasis on an expenditure made with regard to the splash pad. Now, the city auditor said that there was no violation of state law. There was none of any kind whatsoever. There was no embezzlement. The money in question went to the project. The June 4th, 2013 deadline is very arbitrary, it is very capricious, and it's very unreasonable. Now, it seems like that this board is trying to micromanage the property, the matters, the things, and the affairs that are under the exclusive jurisdiction of the Park Commission. the matters of the Park Commission is solely and exclusively the business of the Park Commission. The city attorney has gone on record tonight in saying that the matters, the property and things that relates to the parks, including its property, are matters that need to be addressed by the Park Commission, and only the Park Commission has that legal authority. Now, in light of the fact that this is a matter that is under the sole jurisdiction of the parks, then the Park Commission needs to address that. Now, it is my further personal opinion that the Park Commission has done a very good job. Now, regardless of who's in the position, I'm gonna call it as I see it. I'm not gonna sit here and allow no one person or persons to be crucified wrongfully. I think that the Park Commission has done its job. The Park Commission has been run well. The Park Commission, through its members, have exerted very good leadership. Now, that's a difference of opinion, but they have exerted good leadership. Now, where was the media and the press when we got the preliminary report from the Ethics Commission? Where was the media and the press when we got the final report from the Ethics Commission said that the mayor or some members of the governing body failed to comply with the open meetings law when it came to retreat and posting notice on some members, on some matters and things dealing with committee meetings. You know, the Ethics Commission, based on my recollection, Mr. City Attorney, you correct me if I'm wrong, the Ethics Commission gave a finding that the board, being our governing body, needs to ensure that the law is complied with. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Attorney. So no highlight, no special emphasis was given that. So all of a sudden we have no violation of the law. The money was expended, and this splash pad is being used by the citizenry of the city of Starkville, Mississippi. The dedication took place. The taxpayers' money went for that. That wasn't the first time there's been an issue dealing with monies over the history of the city of Starkville, Mr. Auditor, and it won't be the last time. You know, there was not any conversion or embezzlement of funds. There was no converting funds to anyone's personal use. Now, so we have this splash pad, and anybody who want to go and use the splash pad, it's open for public use. And I think that if anybody got any concern about the Park Commission, you need to call and get on the agenda for the Park Commission. Now, the members are appointed by the board, and you know, and what makes me speak so fervently about this, and I just see through things, and we got this election coming up, and you know, and the timing of this whole thing, and the most prudent thing, in my opinion, to have been done was just to put this thing off until after the election. But since it's not, there's a motion on the floor that's going to require all these things to be turned over by the next meeting. We got a holiday coming up on Monday. I mean, what's the urgency here? What's the urgency? Just like the historic preservation, what's the urgency? So I say that, let the commission take care of its business. They're capable. They're electors that are capable of taking care of the city's business. We got enough business to take care of. That's why we have an autonomous park commission. So, you know, it appears that the rate that's going, it's going to probably pass on this motion. It'll probably pass on a three tie. I anticipate, and the mayor, perhaps, I hope I'm wrong, but I anticipate he'll break the tie on this in the favor of requiring Mr. Moreland and his group to come up here and face the litany of questions and all the other bureaucratic proposals that's being tendered here tonight. So I think that this is purely politics. Hope the voters see what's going on here. You know, every time you get the newspaper, I'm gonna quit reading these papers. Every time you get one talking about the Park Commission, the Park Commission, the Park Commission. And don't call me for a quote because I don't want to talk to you, newspapers. So, but the bottom line is, what needs to happen is you need to treat everybody alike. These citizens on the Park Commission is working hard. They're doing a good job, and they're doing their very best. And I think they're doing a remarkable job. Look at what our parks are doing. They're good parks. They're run well. They're real clean. There's good proven leadership with our park commission. So hopefully we'll defeat this motion, and the city attorney has already spoken to the authority of the park commission. Let's turn this matter over to the park commission, let them address these issues, and then when they do their quarterly report every time, they do a quarterly report. So let's just wait for the quarterly report. Why are we requiring a report before the quarterly report? So they got a quarterly report coming up, so when they get the quarterly report, whoever the chairperson and the whoever is the person in charge every day down there, they can just come up here and give us a report. And when they come up to give the quarterly report, we can ask them questions, and just like we do anything else. So I think that that we need to defeat this motion and move on to the next matter on the agenda. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Further discussion. Alderman Davis.
Just, Randy, I appreciate you being here. Appreciate the audit. It is unfortunate, the timing of this. You've clearly stated that it was intended and the reasons why the timing is the way that it is. The man who will be sitting in this seat as a Parks Commissioner and was quoted in the paper, I do read the paper and I appreciate the paper, that he didn't even know about some of the issues that are there. So as the one who is elected to be the governing person for this community, and as the one with the responsibility for appointing Parks Commissioners, we may not have financial control over everything, but the money we do. And for things, and I'm no accountant, so I know when things are significant enough to be findings, they are worthy of discussion at least. And so I think there are issues. It can be political or it cannot be political. I don't care. But the fact is, there are systemic issues that are shown here. This is just a sample. And there are real issues with the 2% money. And we can't lose sight of the fact that 2% money comes up for reappropriation through the Public and Private Act in 2015. So the last thing we need to be doing is preparing ourselves and acting in this manner to where we're sitting 6 months into a fiscal year and we've got $12 sitting in a dedicated fund account with 2% money. We have to prove success by these things in order to get these things back. And we need, as a measure of internal control, and I appreciate that in there, and I appreciate the motion from Ms. Sistrom, we need whatever internal control we have so that we understand how those things, so that we, as the governing body who go back and get that money again for the Parks Commission, because it will be us, not the Parks Commission doing it, so that they can pay that debt service, we need to be able to have those controls in place so that this doesn't repeat itself. Not only from that perspective, but even then. So, I yield. I'm ready to vote.
Alderman Sistrom.
I just want to say one more thing. There's been some talk about this being a specific issue in the comments that were made after my motion. This is not about a specific issue. This is, as Mr. Dumas pointed out, this is a more systemic issue, and stepping back and taking a look at those operations in total. And one item does not lead you to say that there was a material weakness. There was obviously more than one thing that occurred, which would indicate that there is more that we need to be looking at, or we are shirking our responsibilities to the taxpayers by not following up on this. I think that it's incumbent upon each of us that sits up here to take the taxpayers' money very seriously and what's done with it very seriously. And when we have an auditor sitting in front of us saying that there are weaknesses in an area, for us to call it political, for us to not address it, means that we are shirking our responsibilities. And with that, I've exhausted my comments, I believe.
Alderman Carper.
Let it be duly remembered and noted that the very first vote to table this was a 3-2 vote with an abstention.
Further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none.
I got one, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Vaughn.
Mr. Scrivener.
Yes, sir.
Was this splash pad paid out of 2% sale tax?
Was
The splash pad?
Yes, the
That's what's
splash
called.
pad was
It
paid
out
out
2%
of 2%.
sale tax.
Out of the 2% tax, that's correct.
I know numerous of times, because I'm the Alderman Ward 7, the splash pad in that ward. I know numerous of times Mr. Marlin called me because the city hadn't released the funds to make those notes on that, numerous of times. And not only numerous of time, when Mr. Kuvayon was there one day, he asked me, he said, Mr. Kuvayon asking for his money. What is taking the city so long to release the 2% sale tax so that he can pay his employees? Just happened 3 times to me. So where all this is coming from? Don't we move money around to pay other bills? I mean, I don't understand it. And just like everybody can see this election day on June the 4th. Why are we asking this for election day? And election day June the 4th? Why are we asking this for this day? I mean, this is very hard and very cruel for us to be like this. But I guess that's why the re-election is around.
Further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Alderman Sistrunk's motion, please signify by raising your hand. All those opposed, please signify by raising your hand. The vote is 3 in favor with 3 against, and I vote yea. The measure passes. And Mr. Scrivener, that will conclude this report. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Mayor, I'm gonna step out for just a second. I'll be right back.
All right, the next matter on the agenda is the consideration of making an appointment to the Oktibbeha County Library to fill the unexpired term ending on 9/30/2013.
I got Mr. John Nelson. I like the motion that Mr. John Nelson Jr.
Motion from Alderman Vaughn is to appoint John Nelson to fill the vacant unexpired term on the Library Board of Trustees, which will end on September 30th of this year. Alderman Vaughn, is that your motion?
Yes, it is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion's been seconded by Alderman Corey. Alderman Vaughn, do you wish to speak on the merits?
He's a family man. He's a good young man. He got kids in school, and I feel like he'll do a very good job.
What did you recommend? All right. Alderman Vaughn, Ms. Sproul had made a recommendation to extend the term beyond September 30th, since it is such a close period to now. And
Everything close.
is that something you would like to consider? Because your motion as it stands now is until the 30th.
Rescind it. Extend it?
Yeah, I'm trying to see what the recommendation was. You mean it'd be till 2018?
Yeah.
Okay, her recommendation was to make it the standard 5-year term, so it would be until 2018. Would you like to rescind and restate?
I think it's modified.
Or modify?
Yeah, let's modify it.
All right, without objection, Alderman Vaughn is seeking to modify his motion to be for a term ending on September 30th, 2018. Alderman Vaughn, is that your motion?
Yeah, it is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Corey. Alderman Vaughn, do you wish to speak on the merits? Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. The next matter on the agenda is the consideration of a study by the Community Development Director on identifying and adopting scenic byway and entry corridors into the city of Starkville. Alderman Dumas, would you
Yeah,
like
I'll
to
just introduce this real quick. As y'all know, this past term, we've tried to look at our comprehensive plan. We did, and through that process, we came to the point of form-based codes and ultimately adopting form-based codes. Comprehensive plans need to be adopted, are amended every 5-10 years. Ours was adopted in 2005, so we're in that time frame. This is one of the first steps with, and logically so, one of the first things that a community development director would do was look at our comprehensive plan. So he wants to, it costs no money. He's just going to look at some corridors, how we begin to address entryways into town. So 389, Highway 12, Highway 25. and look at that as part of the initiating process through the amendment of our comprehensive plan. So he'll work through this, come back with reports.
The reason is this part of his day-to-day duties, or is this something, I mean, why is this on the agenda?
Yeah, no, it's very much part of a planning process, and I'm very much, he actually, we've talked about this, and I like the proactive nature of this, of looking at it as part of, because those entryways were discussed several times in the comprehensive plan, and nothing has ever been done about it, so he sees that as low-hanging fruit that he can look
Well,
at.
why are we having to vote on it? I mean,
Well,
For
there's nothing in
recognition,
there in
or
terms
is-
of a study, so it's just an approval of him going forth and doing it. I guess there could be administrative authorization, I don't.
I can certainly authorize it. The board can go on record as doing it to create the record for him to come back for a subsequent report. It really doesn't make that much of a difference.
Well, I'm either way. I mean, I'm very much in support of just going ahead and authorizing him to do so. So I move approval, that we direct, Community Development Director to, identify and report back to us on a scenic byway and entry corridor study for the city of Starkville.
Alderman Dumas has made a motion to direct the Community Development Director to perform a study identifying and adopting scenic byway, on identifying and adopting scenic byway and entry corridors into the city of Starkville. Alderman Dumas, that's your motion.
It is.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Corey. Alderman Dumas, do you wish to speak on the merits?
I don't.
Any discussion, any discussion, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Alderman Dumas's motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
Nay.
All right, let's do it by show of hands. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. All those opposed, please signify by raising your hand. By a vote of 3 in favor with 1 against, this measure passes.
Move approval.
All right, motion has been made by Alderman Dumas to approve of the paying agent agreement for the City of Starkville General Obligation Utility Refunding Bond Series 2013 as presented. Alderman Dumas, that's your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Corey. Alderman Dumas, do you wish to speak on the merits?
I do not.
Any discussion, any discussion, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. All right, we've got an issue. Could somebody go get Sandra before Ben leaves the room to, well,
So we don't lose quorum?
yeah, it's fine if we don't have quorum actually in the room, as long as no action.
I'd like to reorder item 1 to the end of the agenda.
Okay, motion has been made by Alderman Dumas to reorder the agenda. Oh, Alderman Sisters, all right, Alderman Dumas is no longer making that motion. Alderman Carver, would you like to exit the room?
Yes, I will.
All right, we'll give Alderman Carver a moment to recuse himself for the consideration of the fire department claims document.
I move approval.
Motion has been made by Alderman Dumas to approve of the City of Starkville claims docket for the fire department as of May 16, 2013. Alderman Dumas, that's your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Corey. Alderman Dumas, do you wish to speak on the merits?
No.
Any discussion, any discussion, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
Nay.
And by a vote of 3 in favor with 1 against, this measure passes. And we'll give Alderman Carver a moment to re-enter the room. The next matter on the agenda, Alderman Dumas has made a motion to approve of the City of Starkville claims docket for all departments except for the fire department as of May 16, 2013. Alderman Dumas, that's your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Carver. Alderman Dumas, do you wish to speak on the merits?
I do not.
Any discussion, any discussion, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
Nay.
By a vote of 3 in favor with 1 against, this measure passes. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, we're back to 5. By a vote of 4 in favor with 1 against, this measure passes. The next matter on the agenda, Motion has been made by Alderman Dumas to approve of a job description and authorization to advertise to fill the position of city planner in the Community Development Department as presented. Alderman Dumas, is that your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Sistrunk. Alderman Dumas, you wish to speak on the merits?
No.
Any discussion?
Is this the previous assistant city planner?
Yes.
We're just changing the name. Do we do a name? Normally y'all change the name.
Well, we have two openings, actually. We have, the opening of city planner and the opening of assistant city planner.
Okay.
Mr. Snowden's position was actually created new, so this would be,
City planner.
combining those and just hiring one.
Further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
Nay.
By a vote of 4 in favor with 1 against, this measure passes.
I move that we go into closed session.
Alderman Dumas has made a motion to go into closed session to determine whether there is a need for an executive session. Do I hear a second? Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Sistrunk. Alderman Dumas, you wish to speak on the merits?
I do not.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. At this time, I'll ask that everyone clear the room so that the board can go into closed session to determine whether there's a need for executive session.
Any decision?
She has the lead. That wasn't an official count. Official count. Official count.
They gotta do another count tomorrow?
Well, they
I want you to go
counted.
too. Long without any
Not counting
discussion.
the affidavits?
Keep us on our toes.
I don't think they've counted the
You
affidavit.
were uncomfortable. No, I remember Randy Scrivener was.
Well, it's just,
Oh, really?
it's different, it's tough. It's just tough to be a political pinata. Football,
No doubt about it.
it's just a tough spot to be in.
No doubt about it.
All right, do we have anything that is timely?
Yeah, I've got to just get approval for the first item, which is to settle a quick take for the appraised value in the Starkville versus Gillespie case. The appraised value is $1,304.
Can we motion
So
that in
moved.
closed session?
Do what now?
Can we motion that in closed session?
No, you gotta go into
You can
executive.
come back in,
Come back,
you
do
can
it
come
in
back
open.
in open session if you want
All right,
to.
I move that we come out of closed session.
All right, motion's been made to come out of closed session. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Corey. Alderman Dumas, you wish to speak on the merits?
You seen the storm?
Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
It's a front.
You're gonna need some more ayes in that. All those
Got it.
opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. Nobody leave. We're hanging by a thread here. Lynn, invite the public back in.
And the motion is to approve settlement in Starkville versus Gillespie for the court-appointed appraised value.
I got it.
Oh, you want me to read it?
No.
Somebody's got to, right?
Invite the public back in.
No, because we're not going into executive, so.
But somebody's got to make the motion.
Take the motion.
Back in the, open session.
Tell me that again?
Move approval to settle Starkville versus Gillespie for the court-appointed appraised value.
V. Gillespie. For court-appointed appraised value.
The board opted not to go into executive session. We are now back in open session, and Alderman Dumas has a motion.
I move that we
Street Historic Ordinance. And that will take us